Welcome to the All Metal Mode podcast with your host, Michael Hare. Tune in every Monday night, 8 p.m. Eastern with co-host Gypsy Jules, and every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern with Matt Hoffman as we talk to guests, discuss metal detectors, equipment, and everything treasure related. Feel free to join in the discussion in the chat room during the show, and please, if you like what you hear, we'd appreciate you taking a moment, hit that like button, and share the link with your friends. We hope you enjoy the show. The All Metal Mode podcast starts right now.
Nocta Macro Detectors is the fastest growing manufacturer in the industry, and for good reason. Many detectorists, including Mike Hare, call us the most innovative, but we are so much more than that. We listen to and care about our customers. We also offer a wide range of detectors to fit all of your needs. Come check out all of our products today at www.noctadetectors.com. Detectors for everyone, everywhere. A lifetime.
Hey everybody, this is Mike, and welcome to the All Metal Mode podcast with my very special co-host Gypsy Jules on Monday night. You can find us on Facebook at All Metal Mode as well as All Metal Mode Podcast UK. All Metal Mode is every Monday and Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and All Metal Mode UK is every Thursday at 8 p.m. GMT or 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, if you're interested in reading any of my reviews or metal detecting articles, you can find them at allmetalmode.com. If you click on there and go into the up at the top, you'll see articles, and click on that, and there you go. Don't forget, new free online magazine, Dirt Digest magazine, is now available. Check them out. DirtDigestMagazine.com. Again, that's DirtDigestMagazine.com. 2019 Watts Rendezvous. It's a 3-day gold and treasure hunt, June 21st, 22nd, 23rd, Mancos, Colorado. It's $215 per person. Cutoff is May 15th, so that's coming up pretty quick. Don't forget that. Texas Treasure Show is this weekend, 26th, 27th, and 28th at Carthage, Texas. So if you're in the area or this part of the country, check it out. Tomorrow night, Matt and I will be talking to Scott Treckler, who has been having a lot of success swinging the Nocta Macro Amphibio. Matt and myself also have the Amphibio, so that ought to be a pretty good show. It's going to be an Amphibio show, so that ought to be fun. Tonight's guest is, hold on one second, James, I hope I say this right, McQuiston. I didn't ask his name, how to pronounce his last name before the show. I guess that's something I should have done. Come on, Gypsy. You're falling behind. You're not keeping track of me. But James will be joining us here in a few minutes. He's an author. He's written, I believe, 3 books on Oak Island on that topic, and he's been on the show. So really looking forward to having him on tonight. I've talked to him a little bit, and very interesting fella. Great stories, great storyteller. So it should be a lot of fun. How you doing, Gypsy?
I'm doing wonderful.
That's good. That's good. I didn't.
I'm terrible with names, so I bet you did a way better job. I bet James is going to say you pronounced it perfectly. I would have butchered it. So.
You better hope, because you should be keeping track of me pre-show and make sure. No, that's all. I'll take the blame. It's my fault. Hi, James. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Glad to be here, and you did pronounce the name right.
Oh, thank goodness. I was sweating bullets there for a second. I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just said it like I knew it.
Well,
I messed up.
A lot of the people in the family say it a variety of ways, and we always kid each other about who has it right, but I do. So you and I do have it right. So
All right. I nailed it.
that counts.
I'm proud of myself. So proud of myself. Good deal. So, James, again, thank you for coming on the show. I'm really looking forward to this. We spoke the other day and I love a storyteller. And although we didn't talk real long, I could have talked to you for hours because I was having a fun conversation and I loved hearing your stories. So I'm really looking forward to getting in depth on this. And, I know you said when you were on Oak Island, you talked to them for 2 hours and they take a few minutes of that and made it. So I'm really can't wait to hear what was left out that they didn't have time for. And you've got your own theory. Your books are all about your theory, correct?
Yes, the first one was more on the theory of travel pre-Columbus, the ease of it compared to what Columbus did. And I talked a lot about Glooskap and Zichmini and did some phonetics and history to determine who they might have really been. And I also identified a couple of items from Scotland and that would be worth a fortune if they could find them that are missing that you might want to take to New Scotland. And I talked a lot about the Templars. But the second book was the one where I started narrowing it down to the people and the year, and the year is 1632. So first book's Oak Island Missing Links. The second one is Oak Island 1632. And that's the one I went up in 2018 to talk in the War Room about. But on the way up there, and while I was there, and shortly after I returned, enough new information had developed that I knew I had to write the third book, which pretty much tells my version of the who, what, when, and why. But even that's been added to. And I was on April 9th, and I actually was making final additions to the book that Saturday before that, because I had just sent Rick and Doug some pretty cool stuff I found. And then I thought, well, why don't I put it in the book? I can update the book really quickly because it's on-demand printing. And it'll still be ready for Tuesday. I was holding it till Tuesday because out of respect for them. Because, you signed a non-disclosure agreement.
Right.
So you don't want to.
But
they're great people.
How can people get a hold of your books before we get too far?
All right. They're all on Amazon. The last one is Oak Island Nights. And that one... the reason why that's Knights with a K, by the way, because so many of my characters ended up being knights of various orders. And I thought, wow, if that's the one thing all of these different disparate ideas have in common is knighthood. And the artifact that was found at New Ross is on the cover of my book. And that was the Order of the Garter Knighthood Medallions. So it just seemed like the natural title for the book.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That medallion actually, I know your world is about metal detecting and mine is about detecting. I do searches in old books and documents, but the medallion would be of, I would think, considerable interest to your listeners. It's a 1671 Knighthood Medallion. It's silver, and it's a little, the circumference is a little bit less than 2 inches, and it's a little less than a 1/4 inch thick. It might be 3/16, I guess, maybe thick, but it's silver. And in spite of the fact that it was in the ground for 300 years, And now this gentleman's had it since 1975. It still would only take a little bit of work to brighten it right up. Mm-hmm. It's just tarnished slightly.
That's great. Now, do you mind sharing that story with us?
Well, one of the theories that's not my theory about what's buried on Oak Island is that a treasure from a Spanish galleon called the Concepcion was taken. Part of that treasure was taken to Oak Island, and there, in my mind, there's no real evidence of that. But the person that found that treasure, he did go to Nova Scotia. He actually took Nova Scotia back from the French, and he became the governor. And his career before that was as a treasure hunter. He found the Concepcion treasure and took it to England. And he was knighted there, even though he was an American and he came from a family of middling means. So he was totally ineligible for knighthood. But he also brought a few $1 billion in today's money to England and essentially saved England. And it was said to be between 30 and 45 tons of gold and silver. So you can calculate that.
Wow.
So the gentleman that financed him, because the king had no money. He was a Catholic. He was under pressure from the Protestants. He had no money. But this other gentleman had been well-to-do all his life. Christopher Monk was his name. And he had given up on politics and all his titles and everything. He just he was a heavy drinker, and he just wanted to coast his life out, basically. So he invested in this gentleman who had been known for picking over wrecks, known wrecks, whatever he could find. And so he financed him to go after this treasure, and he did. He brought it back in 1687. But one of the things that this Christopher Monk gave up was his knighthood. And so this medallion, there's only 3 of them from that year, 1671. There were only 3 gentlemen that were knighted to the Order of the Garters. And the other 2, I found them. One was in a Swedish museum, and it was stolen along with a lot of other items. And they told me that they feel that they were melted down for the precious metal. But they had photos of it, luckily. So I was able to get photos of the front and back. The second one is in the British Museum, and they had photos front and back too. And then, of course, I took the only real good photos of the New Ross medallion. And the fronts are absolutely identical. The backs were imprinted. You can tell they were imprinted separately because they're slightly off from each other. They say the same thing, but they're slightly off. So we know that that's the only person in history that medallion could belong to is the financier of William Phipps. Well, William Phipps, when he went to Nova Scotia, he wrote in his own daily log that he and his men were searching for plunder by land, by sea, and underground. And the New Ross Foundation that's up there has been tied to Oak Island through the years, through legend mostly. But what I believe happened is that he made it, at least as far as New Ross, possibly he made it to Oak Island, searching for a treasure that he knew about through his own family. And the medallion itself has a dent. Well, it's kind of compressed at the very bottom, but on the back side where the type is, the type in that one particular area is dented right in. So it receives some kind of trauma. And so, one theory would be that he was up there fighting the French. I mean, that's what he went there to do, was to oust the French. So he could have been in battle with the French or even with the Micmac First Nations tribes, and it just got hit and fell off his chest. Or he just lost it while he was digging underground with his men. Now, he went there with 700 men, and people have asked me, well, why would he be wearing it? Well, uh, when you were installed in your Order of the Garter, you were told to wear it. I mean, it was part of, right in the installation instructions. And also, if you're leading 700 men, you think about it in an office, the boss wears a tie. When the sheriff goes out to get the bad guys, he wears his badge. So there's precedent for him wearing this around his neck when he was there. And what I had just found out recently that I sent off to Rick Lagina called me today, and this was, I'm sure, part of the reason why, is because I found out that the king, just 7 years before Phipps was knighted, had got a concession from the Order of the Garter Knights that his word was law. In other words, whatever he said went. Period. End of story. So that meant he could do what he wanted with that knighthood medallion. But then I found out that the 2 years before that, Christopher Monk gave up all his titles and duties and responsibilities. He'd been in the court for many, many years, most of his life, and he was just fed up. So he quit everything and just retired to his booze, basically. And so the medallion in that particular knighthood would have been up for grabs, and the king had every right to do whatever he wanted with it. And he had just been handed several $1 billion, and Monk, they say that Monk got between 45,000 to 90,000 pounds. And if I use the currency calculators, vary a lot. They can rate on gold, they can rate on the price of land, they can rate on average wages, or they can rate it on influence in the economy, which what that means is, like, if you're a millionaire in the United States, you're one of millions of millionaires. But if you're a millionaire in, say, Bangladesh or somewhere, so you have more, you have more influence in the economy. Go to India, which, well, I don't know so much with India now because they're getting built up quite a bit. But, go to a third world with $1 million, right, and you're somebody. So based on that, Monk's share would have been something could have been as much as 1 to 3 billion, and the king's would have been a lot more than that. And so, consequently, all they had to do for William Phipps was just hand him a little piece of metal, but to him it meant the world, because he came back calling himself the New England Knight, and he played a big role in politics in Massachusetts, and then they elected him to go up and take over Nova Scotia from the French, and he became the governor of Nova Scotia. So, oh wow! So that's the story of that medallion, and one of the things that we are kind of wanting to do is to actually take it to England and compare it physically to the one in the British Museum to see how, to see the measurements, the weight, all of that. And we can't do the Swedish one because that one was destroyed or stolen, whatever. So only the two exist right now. Now, they had them for other years. They cast the fronts they cast several of the fronts because, they didn't know how many people they were going to initiate each year. So they would cast maybe 10 years worth of them. And then in that year, they would initiate everybody or install everybody on the very same day. And then they would date it to that year, which was 16. It was in Roman numerals, but 1671.
So, James, is this medallion, is it made of silver, gold?
Yes.
What type of metal?
Silver.
Silver? Okay.
Silver. Yeah.
All right.
Hey, real quick.
It's pretty heavy.
Real quick, I want to say, I should have said this at the beginning of the show. If you're a new listener or if you're not aware, we have a live chat going on where you find, whether you're on your computer or your phone or however you're tuning in, if you look for like your play button, your pause button and all that, there should be a little chat bubble. If anybody has questions tonight, let's hold off until we're getting close to the end, and then we can ask James some questions, and so let's hold that off till the end. But yeah, if you want to join us in chat, we'd love it, and especially if you want to ask questions, jump into chat.
So, two things that I'd like to finish up on with the medallion. Number one is that it isn't central to my overall theory, but it helps support that theory in a number of ways. But also, nobody knew what it was. The only photo that existed was a Polaroid of it laying down on the floor. So it was very small in the photo. And so I got wind of it and started looking into it and found out it was an Order of the Garter medallion. And then I found out who it belonged to. But it had never been shown to the public because this gentleman found it when he was a boy playing with his Tonka toys, and he was very possessive. Still is very possessive of it, and you can understand that. And particularly now that he knows what it is, But he was also afraid the Nova Scotia government might take it, but they don't. We actually got a letter from them written to him saying they would not take it away from him, but. He had never shown it in public. So we were working through his cousin, and by we, I mean Rick Lagina and Doug Kroll and myself. And we went up to New Ross and talked to his cousin, and he showed us where they found it, near the foundation at New Ross there. And so that was Friday, and so I was leaving on Sunday. So he said, well, I don't know. I don't know if I can get him to show it to you or not. He said, maybe next week. And I said, well, it can't be next week if you want me to be involved because I'm leaving on Sunday. So it's got to be tomorrow or never. And my involvement was going to be, I was going to tell him what I found out about it, identify it and who it belonged to and how I think it got there. So I thought that deal was shot and we were just going to have Saturday to vacation, and then take off on Sunday. And at 8:00 in the morning, I got a call from Doug, and he said the guy's coming with the medallion. He's going to be here at 10, so get over here as soon as you can. So I get there, and there's Rick Lagina on his cell phone talking to Prometheus, trying to convince him to bring the cameras over because they take the weekend off. They work long hours there during the week, and they had taken the weekend off. And they weren't buying it, so he hands me his cell phone. He says, here, you talk to him. So I had only talked to this guy a couple other times, and it was all about business, like the car rental and the hotel and things like that. It wasn't about anything to do with filming. But I said, this is a real big deal for Nova Scotia, let alone for Oak Island. And he said, we just can't do it. He said, my guys are gone every which way. He said, they worked a long week, and boy, when the weekend comes, they're gone. And I said, all right. So it was just Rick and Doug and I in the war room when he came with his cousin and with another relative that's kind of like a local historian there. And so Rick said, well, go ahead and you can run the meeting, Jim. So I said, well, here's the deal. I said, you tell us how you found it and show it to us, and I'll tell you who it was originally given to and how I think it might have got to New Ross. So he told us how he got it, and then he was just so nervous and taking it out. He had it in tissue in a box, in a little wooden box, because he never showed it to the public, So then I took the photo that's on my book, which is the only real good photo. Well, I took, probably 10 of them, but those are the only good photos of it. And then I passed it over to Rick and Doug, and they had a magnifying glass and calipers and everything ready to. They didn't have anything to weigh it with, but they were ready to give the serious inspection. So then I told the gentleman my theory and everything, and they were happy to hear it. And so the only film footage we have of it are the photos that I took. But anyway, and that might, if I ever go back up there, that might be a subject that's talked about. But again, that isn't pertinent or central to my theory at all, but it does add some support to it.
Well, let's get into your theory, and first I want to start with how did you get interested in Oak Island?
Yeah, I wanted to ask that too.
Well, actually, I got interested in it way back when the Reader's Digest article came out. Back in the early 60s, there was only 3 channels on TV, and the adults pretty much controlled them. So I spent a lot of time reading adventure books, and 2 of my favorite were The Count of Monte Cristo and Treasure Island. And the one thing that they both have in common is a treasure buried on an island. And so when the Reader's Digest article came along, it was just like one more nail in the coffin of me wanting to know about treasures on islands. So I followed it on and off through the years. If I saw it in some kind of book on unknown mysteries or whatever, I'd read it and all that. But I went up there in 2007, and turns out that Oak Island was closed off, and that is the same year that they made the deal with Dan Blankenship. So it could have been that they were in the middle of negotiations or what, or maybe they just didn't want anybody nosing around. So I was a little bit disappointed, but we went all over Nova Scotia. It's just absolutely beautiful up there. So it wasn't a disappointing trip by any stretch, but the fact that I couldn't get on Oak Island was. So I hadn't even really watched the first. I don't even know if I watched the first season at all of Curse of Oak Island. I tend to write a lot. I've written a lot of other books, and so I don't watch a lot of TV. And but I was redoing a book that I'd written on my family about 10 years earlier, and one of our, if you want to call it, claims to fame is that one of our distant relatives is what they call the Premier Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia, and all the Premier means is that his line is the first in line, and he wasn't originally; he was second in line originally, or the family was, but the first in line, that their line died out in like 1908 or something, so we moved up to that position, and his last name, Gaelic last name, is McQuiston, and that became through the years McQuiston in Scotland and Ireland and America. But if you're going to say it the Gaelic way, it's McQuiston. And so, and I've emailed with him a few times and all that, but I didn't know what it was really all about. I just knew that it was there. So I was watching. I'd been editing the book, and I was watching the show, and I'm like, wait a minute, Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia and Oak Island's in Nova Scotia, do they have anything to do with each other? So I just wrote them. I wrote to their tours email saying, I don't know if you guys have ever looked into this. Maybe it has something to do with it, whatever. Well, they emailed me back and said, would you be willing to talk on the phone? So they called me back. It was Paul Troutman that called me back. And we talked for an hour. So I was asked a lot of questions, which I didn't even know a lot of the answers to. So I started looking into it, and I was getting happier just learning it all myself. But I was sending hundreds of emails off. And eventually, I got they kind of assigned me to Doug Kroll, and so I talked the most with him. But probably 4 or 5 months into it, they said, you need to write a book. You've got so much information. So that was my first book, Oak Island Missing Links. And then they asked me to come up in 2017 to talk about that. So they filmed me for a couple hours that year. And by the way, I was the last person to be filmed in the old war room.
Oh, cool.
And I had no idea what was going on, but I got done, and we were all outside standing around, and we were going to leave the island. And I thought, well, I want to stick my nose in there one more time, because when it's the heat of the moment and the cameras are on and all that, you're not really looking around too much, So I thought, well, I just want to poke around in there for a minute before I leave. So I went in, and a lady was in there photographing each section of wall, and then she was taking everything off it and putting it in a box. And I said, what are you doing? She said, well, we're moving to the new war room. today. And she said, did you see that other green building around the bend? And I said, yeah. And I said, well, why are you doing that? And she said, well, first of all, this was just a work shed and it's not very sturdy. And we got a lot of guests coming in and out all the time. And then it also doesn't have good air conditioning. And we have all these artifacts on the walls. We don't want them to get ruined. I learned later that another reason was because it was right at the end of the causeway and they'd be filming and here would come a car full of tourists and get out and start yapping, and they had to deal with that. So they put it up around the bend and they actually put a gate there so you can't drive up unless, they open the gate for you. Mm-hmm. You can't drive up to the new war room. And it looks the same. I think it's slightly bigger, but not noticeably. And it has good air conditioning, of course, and better lighting. They had the ceiling is a little higher, so the lighting can be better in there. And it's sturdier and all that. So anyway, I gave my talk that year, and they liked it and everything, but I was up there more on the whim of the Laginas than because of Prometheus. And Prometheus, I guess, made the decision not to use it. And Rick doesn't pay much attention to the show. He's told me that he's never watched an episode, and I think that's not news I'm breaking. But he's just so busy. I mean, busy. He keeps himself busy on the island, whatever. So, but when I was there, he asked me some questions, a couple specific questions. So, first of all, I was just thrilled that they wanted to hear it, and then actually wanted to learn even more. So, I immediately, when I got back to Pennsylvania, I wrote about a 6-page report on one of the questions he asked. And it took a lot of research to figure it out. But anyway, so that started me down a new path, and that got me on the 1632 date. And so 6 or 7 months later, they said, you got to write another book because now you're not talking in generalities anymore. You're talking specific dates and specific people. So that's when I wrote 1632. So that's the book they had me come up in 2018 for. But like I said, by the time I left, we had discovered so many new things and had new questions and all that I knew I had to write the last book. And I'm not saying it's the absolute last book, but it's certainly the cliff notes of everything that I know, the Reader's Digest version of it for sure. And so that book's out now. I was saving it till the show because I didn't want to spill the beans, basically. But which I tell you was like having a baby because it was like 9 months I had to sit on it. But the good part about it was I got to keep adding new things that I found. And so a lot of the shaft got separated, where I'd have incidental information or whatever. I condensed that down, and when I found something even better to put in. So it actually made it a lot better book. And in the meantime, I got to talk to a few other Oak Island historians and whatever. So that wait was actually worth it because it made the book a lot better. So that's how it came about with the books. As far as the experience up there, I can let you know that the people are incredibly kind people, both Prometheus and the Oak Island team. I can't say enough good about them. I say Rick's the nicest man I ever met besides my own father. And I only met Marty for a short few minutes, and he was heading for something else, and I know he runs a big business and all that. Craig's a very gentle man, like you see him on there, but he's very intelligent. Rick's just, his heart's in this so far he can't even imagine. And Charles is a gentleman, and he's very quiet. So when he does talk, you want to make sure you're listening. Gary is an absolute clown. And I would say everybody you see on the show is the way you see him on the show, except Gary, because he's much bigger clown in person than they reveal on the show. I mean, he just basically doesn't quit. And I drank a lot of beer with him at night, probably for at least 5 nights of beer drinking with him, and heard a lot of stories, and he can get crazy. But, and I know that, I don't know what his reputation in your world is. When they're filming, it's not scripted. And that's the funny part about it, is a lot of people think it's scripted. It's not scripted. It's edited for sure. And in a sense, it's arranged is what I would say, because, for instance, I'm going to come to the island, but they're not going to have 2 drones in the air and 2 guys on the shoreline filming me coming across the causeway waiting for hours, so they say, okay, come over now, and then we'll be ready, that kind of thing. And when you get here, park on the left-hand side of the truck, of Rick's truck or something. But beyond that, they never scripted me. They never told me what to say or anything. And, they edited a lot of my talking down to a little bit, but they told me right up front, they said, you can talk for an hour, you can talk for 2 hours, but we're not going to use more than 5 or 6 minutes. We'll tell you that right now. Well, as it turned out, they used about 10 minutes. I don't know if you noticed that, but I got a lot more airtime than I thought I was going to get. So that was kind of nice. And so I would say the people are great. There's no what you would refer to as scripting. I mean, they'd have to have 10 script writers writing full time. There is, like they have a production meeting in the morning. They have a trailer where they have breakfast and lunch, like food trailer, and they get the team out in a circle, the Prometheus team, and there's probably 10 or 12 of them, and they say, okay, Rick and whatever's going down to the Smith's Cove today, so I want you, and you to go with them. And then Jack's going with Gary over to lot 25, so you 3 go with them, So they're just splitting the chores up, but they're not saying, and when you get there, I want you to talk about this, that, or the other thing. It's just having the people ready to film when something's happening.
Right.
So I know the editing. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so they split the video team because I noticed on the show a lot of times, I've only watched probably the first 2 seasons. I'm not caught up on everything. By the way, James, sorry about that. But anyway, I noticed a lot of times they'll split, like, okay, you go with them and y'all go to the shoreline and then y'all go to lot so-and-so. So those things are usually going on the same day, and they're just filmed at different locations whatever action is going. Correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And I'm sure part of the reason for that is that the season itself is relatively short up there. You can they film roughly May to October. This year they went into November. So they want to get, the biggest bang for their buck. And then they have the whole crew there on the island 5 days of the week. And they, so they want to be as productive as they can. They don't want people just sitting around. So there can be one group of Oak Island guys and one group of Prometheus guys with them in one area while something simultaneously is happening on the other side of the island. Now, the war room is a little different because they usually bring in a good share of the people, the Oak Island team that's on the island. They bring them in there to hear it. And then, of course, they go to that bar, the Mug and Anchor or something like that, and talk. I have to tell you a funny story about that. So the day after my talk, I saw Gary, and I said, hey, I saw your vehicles down there at the Mug and Anchor. I hope I'm getting that name right, but whatever. I said, but we didn't want to stop in and bug you because we didn't know if you were filming or not, so we just went on to a different restaurant. He said, oh, yeah, we were filming there. He said, I got to tell you what happened. He said, so Rick's going around asking us all what we think of you and your theory, and everybody's saying real nice things. And then he gets to me, being Gary, and he said, I tell him I don't know about that McQuiston guy, and he said, Rick looks like really, taken aback by what I said, and he said, why? What's wrong? And he said, well, I thought any minute he was going to grab my metal detector and go down to the beach and start hunting for gold. And I'll tell you what, if I knew anything about metal detectors and I saw it sitting there loose, I probably would have, because I mean, how many times in your life do you get to do something like that?
Right. So, James, have you ever used a metal detector?
Well, I have to tell you, I made the mistake of renting one from the local hardware store, and it picked up everything. Yeah. And right. We live on the right on Lake Erie, and so I find a lot of things washed up, like deck nails and things. But I know there's a ton of stuff in the gravel. It's pretty much gravel definitely. Beaches. And so I rented this one, and that was meant for finding surveying stakes and things like that. And I was getting a hit every 2 inches, and then when I'd get a real strong one, I'd dig down and it'd be an old rusty piece of barrel. So I went up on a hill where there used to be a dance hall, and I thought, well, that might be a good place. And I was still getting hits every 3 or 4 inches, and it was all grass. And I thought, I'm going to have this entire field tore up terrible, So that's when I decided that I just should take this thing back. And,
well, James, so you said you're in Pennsylvania. Is that where you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you've got a lot of history there. I mean, that's something you might consider, especially as involved as you are in history, and for a lot of us, that's kind of the thrill of what we do. The thrill of the hunt is when you do find a piece, one piece that you can trace, like that medallion you were talking about, and you can trace back, and it can help one of your theories or whatever. That's what's amazing about our hobby that we're in, and it plays into what you're doing, and it's fascinating when you start finding those little crumbs of history that can lead to so many things.
Well, not using a detector, but I found a brass handle, and I was able to trace it back to a manufacturer from 1938 for a boat power boat manufacturer. Neat. So I actually used it on a little door here just because that's what it was. But I did find the deck nail too washed up. That was after a big storm. But the advantage that I would have if I do get into this is that the beach to the west of us is a public beach, and it's been scanned over and over and over again. But the one to the east of us is our beach, and it's private, and it's very rocky and stuff like that. So
you may be investing in one soon.
Yeah, it's sitting there waiting, and the dance hall up there. And I've never once, I've been here 5 years, and I have never once seen a metal detectorist at where the dance hall was or where the beach is. So believe me, obviously I thought about it because I went and rented that one, but that was before I knew anything about them. I didn't even know you could set it for ferrous or non-ferrous or any of that. So, I've looked at some. I don't know any of the names or anything. I just went through a bunch and looked at them, and I thought even if I got one of those little handheld deals, I could just sit down there in the gravel beach and just start poking it around and probably find. Yeah.
Right.
But,
we could definitely help you out on that.
There we go. Bring them.
We could definitely help you. Yeah, and we could definitely help you pick out what would fit you and stuff for sure, and let you know what's good for what kind of thing. And that's funny that Gypsy asked that, because I was thinking the same thing. As much as you are into history, that's what got me into the hobby, is my love of history. And I think I have to imagine you pulling something out 150 years, 200 years old, you would probably be hooked real quick.
You would.
It is.
Totally be hooked.
It's a great feeling, and I'll tell you, it's like fishing. It really is. If you get out of it what you put into it, but you don't need a $30,000 boat. You don't need thousands of dollars in fishing equipment. I mean, it's really a very affordable hobby that really gives back. It's quite amazing, and I think if you got one in your hands and somebody that could help you, on how to set it up and give you advice, I think you'd probably be hooked big time. Your love of history.
Especially if I find a coin or something out there.
Oh, you would.
There's thousands. There's actually a few thousand wrecks out in Lake Erie because it was one of the most navigable of the Great Lakes originally, and a lot of immigrants. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I know the guy that dives on most of the wrecks and films them. You're not allowed to take anything off the wrecks, but I also know guys. At least one guy told me that he has done that, but he was sort of an outlaw anyway. But and I also know a gentleman that's written a lot of books about the wrecks. So I had already approached the two of them that the three of us should get together and put together some kind of little documentary of what we know. I try to identify them in the history and all that, but that's down the road because right now it's Oak Island.
Right.
Eating and
That's
breathing
what I was
and living.
about to say. After you're finished with the Oak Island stuff, then you can move on to another one. But until that's through, you might end up writing a couple more Oak Island books.
Well, so to get onto my theory in Oak Island Nights, that's with I keep saying that with the K because the local newspaper did an article and they put it as Oak Island Nights with an N. And I thought, well, people are going to think it's some kind of romantic novel or something, Oak Island Nights or something. But so back in 1620, go right back to the beginning, the Mayflower and a couple other ships landed at the Plymouth colony, and they were Puritans. And at that time, there were remnants of a French settlement up in Nova Scotia at a place called Port Royal, which is on the leeward side of Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is not an island, but it's almost an island, and it's just connected to New Brunswick in one area. So the French had settled there, and they were Catholics. So these Puritans were upset. For one thing, their deed said that they owned Nova Scotia, even though the French would argue with that, certainly. And so they approached King James I of England, who he had been King James VI of Scotland for quite a while. And when Queen Elizabeth died, he took over as the King of England and Ireland as well. And so they approached him to bring some troops over to get rid of these French Catholics up there. Well, he approached his good friend, Sir William Alexander, and that's the key guy in my story. He was a Scotsman that had come down from Scotland with King James, and he was at one point he was named Secretary of State for life. He was on the Privy Council. He held all kinds of positions. So he approached him to get some Scottish soldiers, mercenaries. Scots were known as mercenaries all over at that point. They were fighting in the 7-Year War, just all over the place. So he said, well, we have a New England, a New France, and a New Spain. If you give me that territory as a New Scotland, I'll do it. And so James did. The very next year, 1621, he gave him Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotia means New Scotland in Latin, and the charter was written in Latin. So that's how that all came about. So James or William Alexander, now he had to get people together to go, and so he sent the ship in 1622, but it never made it there. It made it to Newfoundland and got stuck in a storm. So, but at the end of 1622, a guy who soon became his partner, his name was Alexander Strachan, and because there's so many Alexanders involved, I just always refer to him as Al Strachan. He stole a massive treasure in Scotland from a gentleman that was on his sick bed and was one of the wealthiest men in Scotland. He also stole his wife, who was 30 years younger. And so he was charged with the crime. The gentleman passed away, and he married the wife. They were both charged. His brother was charged. 2 or 3 other guys were charged. But they were tried, or set to be tried, before the Privy Council, and William Alexander was in charge of the Privy Council. So their trial was postponed 2 different times throughout the year. And then in the beginning of 1625, the king just gave them remission. So they never were charged, never were tried or anything for stealing this massive treasure. And so in keeping with the timeline, in 23, this is all 1623, in 23, Alexander did get a ship all the way to Nova Scotia, and they tried a settlement about 70 miles or so below Oak Island and New Ross. And in that year, 3 different sources say that there was a secret estate built at New Ross for William Alexander, Sir William Alexander. And one of those sources is the Alexander family themselves. Another one is a family called Nauss, Nauss. And another is the Micmac Indians, a member of that group. So I believe that foundation where that medallion was found was William Alexander's secret estate up there above Oak Island. Well, by 1625, Al Strachan was set free. Nobody in Scotland knows what happened to the treasure. I'm a member or a fellow with the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, and I got that through all my years of research and writing Scottish history and that fellowship. And they didn't know, and they sent me over to the Scottish National Museums, and they didn't know, and they sent me to the Scottish, what would be the National Archives. They call them National Records there. And they didn't know what happened to the treasure, but they did know that there was to be a trial and that it was postponed and that he was given remission. So that verified the story for me. How I found the story, which is really interesting, because I had figured out the year and the date with my second book, but I didn't know what they had buried and all that. Well, Cal Hancock, he is, or at least was at the time, the Grand Historian of the Grand Lodges of Freemasonry in Nova Scotia. And he's a friend of Doug's, and he's actually been on the show a few times. And he suggested a couple old Freemason books to look up. And I was looking them up. I couldn't find them, but I found one that he didn't mention. And it was the history of the Lodge of Number 1 in Edinburgh. And it had this story about the treasure. And it had a complete list of the treasure. And even more interesting is that the first 3 guys that were initiated as what they called non-operative accepted Masons. They didn't call them Freemasons yet, but they're essentially a Freemason, were William Alexander's 2 sons, William Jr. and Anthony, and the third one was Al Strachan. And I actually found the document that it still exists in Scotland. I found a copy of it. And it has their signatures on it, and it explains them becoming Freemasons. It was July 3rd of 1634. 1634. And what's kind of odd about it is that everybody in Scotland knew that Al Strachan had stolen his treasure and this guy's wife, and yet he was still accepted as the third of what became a Freemason. But before all that happened, back in Nova Scotia, they finally got 4 ships there in 1628, and they chased the French out, or they absorbed them. And they were given a safe passage letter from the king, so they could have taken whatever they wanted to, and nobody was to inspect them. Now, if a French ship or French fleet attacked them, they aren't going to listen to a letter, but nobody from Great Britain could. And there was a flagship, like a cargo ship, and 2 privateer ships that went. And they landed in 1629 at Port Royal, and, like I say, absorbed the French or chased them into the woods or whatever. Well, one of the guys that was there was the current acting governor of what the French called Acadia, and so he kind of felt like France had deserted him because they didn't send enough troops to protect Port Royal, and he knew which side of his bread was buttered on, so he allied himself with William Alexander, and Alexander gave him a deed for the property near Oak Island. And Doug and I have been working on it, and we're almost certain that it included Oak Island and New Ross. And one of the reasons is because right below Mahone Bay is a town or an area called La Have, and the deed said 14 leagues north of La Have. Well, a league was about 3.5 miles, so it came out to about 55 miles, which is far beyond the end of Mahone Bay. And it extended inland 30 to 40 miles. So that would cover both New Ross and Oak Island. So if that's the case, and I present a lot of evidence in my book for that, that is the first actual individual deed for Oak Island, because before that, the French owned all of Acadia, and then William Alexander owned all of Nova Scotia. But now he was piecemealing it out to what they called Knights Baronet. And my family was the third to sign up, but they were part of the MacDonald clan, so they were powerful enough that the king, they demanded to be in second place at least. So, and now they're in first place. So, but that, and $5 will buy you a cup of coffee, because the charters for the Knights Baronet were pretty much worn out a long time ago, because it happened 400 years ago. But they don't forget where they owned, and in fact, I found some of the charters and had them translated. They were in Latin, and I had them translated, and to locate where people were at. You got a comment?
It's fascinating how you can trace some of that back so far and still find all this information, and it's still there and available. Is it hard sometimes? I mean, sometimes do you chase something and don't find anything, and then sometimes you're chasing a kind of like a PI, you're chasing a lead, and then it leads somewhere, and then some don't.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, not to get spooky about it, but I have been so lucky in tripping over the right book or getting the right email at the right time, that I have to just feel sometimes like I'm getting help from somewhere else. And I know it sounds crazy, but
it doesn't. It sounds right. I think it's interesting. I love it. I love what you just said.
Well, another McQuiston, his name was either Rod or Ron, I'm not sure, but he was an advisor to one of the chapels, I think Tamel Chapel. And I haven't been able to find too much more about him, but Doug told me that there are a few letters that exist from him. And then another gentleman wrote me who happened to, our family's in a big DNA project, and he matched my DNA exactly, but he had a slightly strange twist to the last name, and there was no Mick in front of it. And so we determined, well, we have to be related, because how could we have a fairly close sounding name and exact DNA? Well, as we were emailing back and forth, found out that he had this interest in Oak Island, and he had done his own research. So what he told me was kind of spooky. He said, I've read this theory that there are awakenings within families, and doesn't have to be necessarily mystical, but families, certain people within the family that have an interest, they start finding out records and what their aunt told them, and they compare them, and pretty soon it almost becomes a family project to nail down what the truth was. And so mine might be just one of those families that's doing that, since we hold that premier Knight Baronet title. But anyway, so they had Port Royal as of 1629. Well, the King of England was King James passed away, and his son King Charles took over, and Charles had married the sister of the French king. So he was supposed to get a dowry, and he only got half of it. So in about 1631, or maybe the year before, he made a deal with the French king that if I'll give you Nova Scotia back if you give me that other half of the dowry. Well, he was kind of a extreme diplomat, because at the same time he was telling the Knights Baronet, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to give Nova Scotia away." So I mean, he's playing both ends to the middle here, and so the people that were in the Scots that were in Port Royal weren't in any hurry to move out, because they really didn't know exactly what's going on. So finally, in the spring of 32, my target date, 1632, they were a bunch of French came there and actually gave them the order, and I have a copy of the order, and they were given 8 days to pack and 3 weeks to leave. Well, the order was given on March 29th. And this is another mystery I solved, which I just love it, because the legend up there was always that the Scots were told to leave right after New Year's, but they knew the date on the order was March 29th. And I thought, well, how cruel is that? If this is supposed to be some kind of a semi-peaceful evacuation, and you're making them tear their fort down in January 2nd or 3rd and standing in the snow till March 29th, that doesn't seem very friendly. So what I found out was that the new year didn't start till March 25th back then. It wasn't until in the early 1700s that they changed it to January. So the legend was true. The French came right after New Year's, told them on March 29th, they handed them the order that they had to leave. Well, what that would mean is that they would have to be out of there by April 27th. So I looked up the weather. I looked up a couple different sources, 2 years of NOAA, and also some testing that had been done by the Nova Scotia government. And it would have been virtually impossible to sail back across the North Atlantic at the end of April. And the reason would be the high waves, the high winds, fog, but also probably most important would be freezing spray. And the problem with that is, if you've ever watched The Deadliest Catch, those metal boats, they take a wooden bat and go out and break the ice off. But if you were to do that to a ship from the 1600s, you wouldn't have much of a ship left pretty quick. And so the freezing spray is what would take you down. So the weather on the Port Royal side, which is the leeward side, was always considerably warmer than the Atlantic side. So as they left Port Royal, it wouldn't have been so bad. But as soon as they got around the bottom of Nova Scotia, they'd be facing a pretty angry Atlantic. And so the deepest bay, and I don't mean deep by depth of water, but deepest into the land, is Mahone Bay. One of the furthest islands back is Oak Island. Oak Island is right at the mouth of Gold River that goes right up to New Ross, where Alexander had his secret estate. You can dig for water on Oak Island pretty easy. You know, it's got fresh water, and which is something you would need for sure if you had a bunch of people. And so what I think happened is that they pulled in there, took refuge on Oak Island. They knew that they couldn't take a lot of stuff back because they didn't want, you know, if they had the Strachan treasure, I'm going to call it the Strachan treasure. And I think they could have also had like Knights Templar treasure, because I looked at the list, and this was the question Rick asked, is there any connection between the Knights Baronet and the Knights Templar? Well, if you looked at the entire list, 25% of the people had some kind of a Templar link. They either had a Templar in their family or they inherited Templar land, whatever. But if you looked at only the first few dozen, every single one of the families had a Templar connection. Alexander, William Alexander, his family was given 2 plots of Templar land about 7 miles away from the Bannockburn battlefield by Stirling there. And one of the partners was Robert Gordon, and his family actually still owns a Templar castle called the Boyne Castle. And the Campbell family had a Knights Templar in their midst, the Maclean family. There's just so many of these families, and that's what I outlined in my second book. I took a lot of these families and showed the link. As a matter of fact, I'll just tell you about one of them because it's pretty cool. The Maclean family, they were kind of somewhat of a vassal clan of the MacDonalds, to a certain degree, but they made their own way. But there was a Lachlan Maclean who was a Knights Templar. He served at Acre, which is the last big stronghold of the Knights Templar in the Holy Land. Later on, there's Lachlan Maclean, who signs on as a Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia. And then a generation or so later, there's a James Maclean, who is the Grand Master of the French Freemasons. He actually went from Scotland down to France to help them out. And so he's the Grand Master of the French Freemasons. And John Smith, who was one of the 3 guys that found the money pit, and he bought the money pit lot right afterwards. His mother was a Maclean. So that one name is so amazingly connected through documentation all the way down. But
that's neat. Interesting.
Yeah, I know. It's just so cool to find these things out, you know. And then you get on a trail like you were asking, Gypsy, that you get on this trail, and my God, I can sit here till 3 a.m. because I'm just like, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I'm right, you know. And I'm thinking the whole time, well, should I take the time tonight to write Doug and Rick? And then hell yeah, I'm gonna. You know, I got this much. So I'm trying to get it in a readable form, story form to get sent off to him. And I have to tell you that Rick has told me more than once, and he told me twice today, don't ever feel that you're bothering us with your emails, because he said, I read them all. He doesn't answer email. He answered one of my emails one time. He prefers the phone, but Craig does, and Doug definitely does. But they respond. But he said, don't ever think that you're in any way imposing on us, because we just read these things avidly because we're looking for every clue that we can find. So I've sent them hundreds. So I'll be doing that. I'll be, and sometimes it's just like, gee, I should look at that book again. And then I go in and that's what happened with this thing that I added at that Saturday before I was on the show, because something just made me want to go back and look at that Freemason book. And I see that it was dedicated to the Earl of Dalhousie. Well, Dalhousie University is right up there in Halifax. And that's where the Oak Island Association met in the early years. That's where the language teacher worked that translated the 90-foot stone, and a couple other connections too. So I looked up Dalhousie University, and sure shooting, it was started by the Earl of Dalhousie. And the guy that the book was dedicated to was his nephew. He became the Earl 2 more generations down. Well, the guy that started Dalhousie University was formerly the Grand Master of the Scottish Freemasons. And the guy that this book was dedicated to was not only the Grand Master of the Scottish Freemasons, but he was the acting Grand Master of the English Freemasons. So there is no way that you could get any tighter on this than the first 3 Freemasons. So I found out that their family name, even though it said Dalhousie was their title, I guess you'd say, but their actual family name was Ramsay. So I thought, well, I'll look into Ramsay, and here this David Ramsay, he was King James' personal assistant, anywhere from bodyguard to taking him to the toilet. I mean, it was that's how close of a personal assistant he was.
Wow.
He was initiated into the Freemasons, and his witnesses were the 2 sons of William Alexander and Al Strachan. So I'm like, holy crap. I mean, you're talking Dalhousie University, about an hour from Oak Island. That's where the Oak Island Association's meeting. That's where they're, this all just ties up into this incredible knot that. So, of course, I was firing all that off to Doug and Rick. And then I'm thinking, well, I still have time to sneak that into my book. So I went in and cut just a little bit more chaff out on 3 different pages and snuck where it was pertinent. I snuck those parts in there. But that's the big thing. If there's an area to go, if there's 2 areas to go from here, it's exploring that nexus of those Freemasons. And Dalhousie University in Oak Island would be one of them, and the other is the medallion and the teaming up with this other gentleman to see what we can find. But I've got a couple of kickers for you. So as if you didn't have enough already,
right?
So I thought one day, well, I wonder if there's any Strachans that live around Oak Island anymore I have to say that there was that deed that I was telling you about for the French guy for the area around there. Well, the witness of it was Al Strachan. So not only was he the 3rd Freemason, not only was he Alexander's partner, not only did he steal the treasure right when Alexander was getting Nova Scotia, but he also witnessed that charter for that French guy. So I thought, well, I just wonder if there's any Strachan. So I looked up and I found about 30 Strachan names in Halifax or in Dartmouth, which is nearby. So I wrote Doug and I said, I'm just curious. I looked it up. And so he wrote me back. He said, oh, my God. He said, John Strachan owned the Nolan Cross lots until 1857. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Wow.
So I did a research, and John was absolutely related to Alexander. John was a Freemason. He owned the Nolan Cross lots on Oak Island. He had a ship that was called the Stag. Well, the Stag has been the symbol of the Strachan clan since at least 1309. They have a record that old with the Stag stamped on it. And so I looked up their relationship. They both came out of Aberdeen Shire. It would be like Erie County is for me, Aberdeenshire. And the families, I traced right back to where the families connected. So at one stage when I thought my book was done, and I had a couple pages about the Stag motif being used by them and how he had a ship called the Stag, and Doug writes me and says, a book just came out by a gentleman who dove on a shipwreck off Oak Island back in 1970 when it was legal, and they dated the ship to the 1600s, And on the ship, they found a set of silverware, and on the silverware is a stag. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So one of the things Rick said today was that they are contacting that guy that dove on the ship. And what they want to find out from him is, do these artifacts still exist? Can we take one, go have it tested, show it to me, show it to other experts, and say, to try to determine, was that a Strachan set of silverware that went down on the ship right by Oak Island? So the web is just weaved so tight, it's just unbelievable. And
wow.
That's why when they showed my theory, God bless them, they gave me twice the time they told me they were going to, but there's no way they could cover it all. The book does to a large degree, although every day I find out new stuff, but the book is just chock full from beginning to end with all these amazing historical connections. And what I do is, because I don't want people to just take my word for it, a lot of it's based on documents. So I reprint either the whole document or the pertinent part of it, and I give the title and the author and the page and all that, so that if somebody wants to go double check my work, if they think I'm BSing them somewhere, they can just go to that document. I mean, a lot of times I tell them where I found it. Like, I found that Freemasons book at Cornell University. They had scanned it in, and it was a free PDF. You could download it. So they can go there and they can read it for themselves, and then they can decide, was I, BSing them, or does it make sense? So that's, the book is full of that, and it's full of my conclusions. And I'm very pragmatic. I think that the number one motive is survival, and the number two motive is greed. I want what you have, That's why nobody can get along, because I want what you have. So if you look at things from those points of view, then you can see everyday motives to a lot of what everybody was doing. So I don't go. I know they use the stars to navigate. I'm not that stupid, but I don't. Whenever they superimpose the constellation over Oak Island, it drives me nuts, because you literally could do that with every constellation if you resize it right, and you turn the orientation the right way, it's going to match something on Oak Island. You could do that with any piece of. And then the other thing is these straight lines. You draw a straight line. Guess what? You can draw a straight line to any point on Earth. It would curve, obviously, but so I don't go for those kinds of things at all. I go for, what were these guys trying to do? They're trying to stay alive. Scotland was falling apart. They'd been absorbed into England. The Cromwell crew was getting ready to start ousting all of royalty, and he did. Eventually, he killed Charles, beheaded Charles I right at his headquarters. And they actually went to Nova Scotia looking for the Alexanders, and they burnt the secret estate in 1654. And the Alexanders finally left 2 years later and settled Alexandria, Virginia. That's what that town is.
Wow.
Yeah.
How interesting is that?
And a guy, a couple hundred years or so after all that happened, an Alexander petitioned to get his land and titles back. And he got fought tooth and nail by a lot of people, a lot of powerful people. And he wrote, the only reason that I'm being fought so hard against is because I'm the heir to a incredible fortune. He didn't say what that incredible fortune was, but I can take a wild guess at it. So I think it was buried there kind of in haste over a month period or so. They had plenty of men. They didn't know if this was the end for them or if it was just a bump in a road. And so they just either didn't think it was worth risking taking all the way across the ocean and back again, or they just didn't want people back in Scotland to know that they had this stuff. And so it was somewhat out of necessity that they did this, with the full intention of coming back. And then the French took over Nova Scotia, and the Cromwell's crew started taking over Scotland and Ireland and England, eliminating all of royalty. But then Cromwell basically set himself up as a dictator anyway, so it wasn't any better than having a king. And then he finally got ousted, and they brought the king's family back. So they couldn't, the Alexanders and the Strachans and all that, they couldn't really survive comfortably in England or Scotland because of what was going on there. And the only way they could survive in Nova Scotia was to hide from the French. And I think that's what they did at the estate at New Ross. And at one point, the past French governor of Acadia, he was given that land around there. The sons of the Scots governor, William Alexander, were living at New Ross. And the new French governor that the French set over, he didn't go over to Port Royal, where they had always been. He settled at La Have, which is only about 30 miles away. So in that area, you had remnants of all three governors within 30 miles of Oak Island. So I think that a lot of people knew that something happened. I think that a few families knew a little bit more specifically what happened, and maybe perchance knew it was on Oak Island. And I think some of it got buried in Freemasonry lore, because they were the first three Freemasons. In fact, the first 7 Freemasons all had connections to the Knights Baronet. And so I think that nobody had it written down exactly what you're supposed to do and exactly where you're going to find it. Or maybe somebody did, but we don't know who did. But in general, it was known about. And so I think the search continued over the centuries. And I think William Phipps was there looking for it too, because he was a treasure hunter. That's what he did for a living. And I think he was. And here's my another little theory about him. So William Alexander's personal secretary, who wrote all the documents for everything that happened with the Knights Baronet, he was named James Philp, Philp. When Alexander died in 1640, he left Scotland. He sold his estate and left, and nobody knows what happened to him. William Phipps was born in Maine, and his father was named James Phipps. Well, they don't have any genealogy backwards from James Phipps. So I looked up the Phipps and the Philp name, and they're both just truncated versions of the name Phillips, and they were used interchangeably for centuries. So one scenario, at least, is that James Philp, who knew everything about what William Alexander had done, went either to Nova Scotia or directly over to Maine. His son was William Phipps, and he told him about this when he was a kid. And he always had that on his mind, and maybe that's why he became a treasure hunter for a living. After he found the Concepcion treasure, and he went back and gave it to James II and Christopher Monk, he said, "You know what? I think I know where there's another treasure that my dad told me about." And Monk said, "I'll finance you on that one too. Go find it." And then he went up there, and he eventually became the governor of Nova Scotia. I don't know, 2 or 3 years he was governor of Nova Scotia. So it's a lot of family clan stuff. I know a lot of who descended from who and all that, but it's just documentation right and left. And you can make up something like this. After I gave my talk this year, I was walking down from the new war room with Rick back down to where down to the interpretive center down there. And it was just the two of us walking down there. And he said, that was one of the best presentations, might be the best presentation we ever had. And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Well, we get so many people with theories, but they don't have any proof." And he said, they come in and they give us a theory, and we sit there looking at each other like, what question should we ask? You know, he said, we didn't even have to ask you anything. You came in with 2 hours of a presentation. You answered every question before we could even ask it. And I can't see a way to punch a hole in what you've told us today. Well, you can imagine how I felt about that. And in the closing scene of when I was on the show, and they were all saying all that nice stuff, I don't even remember any of that, because when you're, again, you're in the heat of the moment and everything. But boy, when I watched that and I saw how nice Rick was, I mean, I knew he said something nice, but I could have never told you what it was he said. And then for Doug to say, you know, that a lot of your theories match a lot of our discoveries, and then to have Charles, who's, you know, been there forever, say, and you back it all up with facts, which is fantastic, or something like that. I'm sitting there watching that, and I'm like, so I filmed it with my iPhone. I've watched it about 20 times, you know. So.
Hey, real quick, I want to take a quick pause here, and I want to actually ask our listeners something. When I talk, I'm getting really bad feedback. Gypsy is, when she talks, it's popping in my ears. Is this audio, are you guys hearing it too, or is it just on my end? Let me know if somebody can let me know. We're having some issues. Hopefully it's just on my end. It's not horrible. We can roll with it, but we're definitely having some issues. James, I've got...
hey, by the way, that's Oak Island for you.
Right. That's what I've heard.
Because everything goes... Yes, because everything... Technical difficulties. Oak Island. So, anyway, go ahead.
Okay, good. They're saying it sounds good there. So, okay, it's just in my... Okay, good. It's just me. Like, Gypsy's popping rope, like her letter, like... Some of the things you're saying, it's like crackling, or I don't know how to explain it. And then I'm hearing feedback anytime I say or do anything. I hate to do this to you. I would like for you to go back to the beginning, and I want to see if I've got a few questions. So this money, this treasure was stolen from this guy. Have you researched that guy and what kind of treasure it was, and then how did he obtain it?
Yes. The entire treasure was listed in the Freemasons book, every single item. But he was the Marshal of Scotland. Now, that was a little bit more power than a Marshal would have in the United States, because, I mean, he was the Marshal of the entire country. But one of his duties was to protect the king, and the other was to protect the crown jewels. So when in times of trouble, he would take the crown jewels to one of his castles. But he owned 30 castles in Scotland, and they said he could stay at home no matter where he was in Scotland. And his family had been the marshals all the way back to King David I, who's the guy that financed the Templars. And so they had just amassed it through the years. That family just got richer and richer and richer. And being a marshal, I'm sure that the law always favored him. You know, if there was a question about who should get this castle in the end, he got it. So of the list that's in the book, and it's a long list. Some of the items that have been found that could relate to it, there were 2 gold chains listed in the list, and back in 1897 they pulled 3 links of gold chain. Now that doesn't prove anything, but that's one point. There was one of the items was 36 dozen gold buttons. And what I found out was that they would often pay their bills with a gold button. If they ran into somebody they owed money to, they'd just pop a button off their coat and pay them. But they found a gold-plated button in Gal 1, which was supposed to be pretty close to the money pit, and they found it in the spoils piles. Gary found it with his metal detector. Well, also the pottery that they've been finding when not Mel Chappell, but Robert Dunfield bulldozed. He found some, and he sent it to Oxford University, and they dated it to the early 1600s. Well, one of the general items on the list was the plenishings, which is a uniquely Scottish word, but it's similar to the word furnishings. But it's all your day-to-day, your utensils and clothing and chairs and things like that, that don't have a value that you would list them higher up on the list. So the plenishings of these castles, not all the castles were robbed, but enough of them were that they got a lot of money. So those could fall into that category of the plenishings, particularly because Dunfield had them dated to 1600s. But the big kicker, and that's kind of what even got me going down this road, was in 1897 they pulled up that little piece of parchment, and the one thing I noticed about it was that the ink wasn't smeared, and yet that the money pit had been flooded in 1804. So that's 93 years that parchment sat down there with India ink on it and didn't smear. So that told me that it had to be in a waterproof container that the drill bit pierced, and it brought it up fast enough that the ink couldn't smear. And when Jack Begley found the parchment in 2017, it was all smeared. So if you imagine a waterproof container with parchment in it, with India ink, and it gets pierced and part of it comes up, and then the water flows in and starts melting all the India ink and smearing it, that would explain everything that happened. Well, the very last item on the treasure list, and it's a long list, it's all in my book, is said a grit cloth bag containing the title deeds for the castles. Well, I was starting out with grit cloth, which is like a sandpaper, and like, what the heck, how would they even make that back then? And all that, trying to figure it out. And I thought that can't be what it is. So I wrote all my contacts in Scotland. Well, I wrote the Society of Antiquaries. They actually eventually got me in touch with the curator of historic fabrics. I believe that was her title. And she said that grit simply meant great or large. And the cloth bag was a canvas bag. They would take this canvas bag and soak it in wax. Then they would put the title deed for the castle in it and sew it up. So that, because the castle stayed in people's families for hundreds of years, so they had to know that 200 years from now, for instance, when they opened up they called them seal bags too. Seal bags are cloth bags, wax bags. When they opened them up, that presumably that title deed would be in good shape, be looking just like it was when it was put in there 200 years ago. And so that would answer the scenario of the parchment from the money pit, because if it was a grit cloth bag or a great sized wax bag with all the title deeds, and it was in the pit, and the drill hit it, pulled out a chunk of the parchment, and this lady told me that parchment was generally only used for very important documents because it's very expensive to make. It's made out of sheepskin, and so it was usually used for deeds or charters, but also important documents like the Declaration of Arbroath, which is the Declaration of Independence for Scotland. That was written in 1320, and it still exists, and it's on parchment. So as long as you take care of it, it's okay. Nothing's going to happen to it. Most just everyday things, a lot of them were written on wood. And then other words, if you had paper, you could write it on paper. But a lot of, so they said that they said, in their opinion, the parchment in there is of some kind of special value, because nobody would write on parchment and put it 150 feet into the ground. This was the Scottish National Museum for giggles, they're not going to just do that for fun. So,
but now let me ask you this: how would have those documents been important to I mean, they don't give you the right to the castle, I would assume. They know they're stolen. I mean, everybody knows. So why would that travel over and make it into something like that?
Well, I understand your question, and half of the answer is that once he married the wife and the guy died, then he legitimately owned them.
Okay.
So if he felt that he wasn't safe in Scotland anymore, but that the day might come when he is safe to come back,
of course,
he would want to have them, and he would want them to be hidden somewhere, where he could get them when the time came. Scotland was in pretty bad shape. There were a lot of what they called broken men, and a lot of them were highwaymen, and it was safer to go by boat somewhere than it was to walk, because you'd almost certainly get attacked by somebody if you were going at night anyway. And Scotland had folded into England. James went down to England and took over as the king there, and his focus was there, not on Scotland. So there was a lot of hard times going on there, and Alexander even wrote about it in his book. And that was one of the things. He did not want to take any of these broken men to Nova Scotia. If you signed up as a knight baronet, you were required to provide 6 men of good quality, and they had to be like a blacksmith or a experienced farmer or a minister or something like that. You got 30,000 acres, and 16,000 were your personal estate, and 14,000 were for a town that you could name and build however you wanted to. And he had that all written out. I have it in the book. And he wanted originally to have 100 knights baronet, and they would circle all the coastline of Nova Scotia to create a defense against anybody taking it over, and to build it up that way. But they were required to have at least 6. Well, the original batch that went to Port Royal, it said that there were only 70, but by 1632, when they had to leave, there were 85 knights baronet signed up. So if you only went with 6 men per baronet, you're up to 510, I think, something like that. But if you had 30,000 acres, 6 men aren't even going to put a dent in it. They can't even probably build your estate. Well, there was a poem or a song sung in that Annapolis Valley where Port Royal was into the 1900s that said that William Alexander brought 2,000 men, less or more. And so I thought, well, what's 85 into that? And that comes out to roughly 25 men per baronet. Well, that sounds a little more realistic. I'd want to take 100 men. And in fact, in William Alexander's little promotional pamphlet that he wrote on it, he suggested 100 men. So it could have easily been 2,000 men. They know that some of them went over to Maine, because it's only about 200 miles over the Bay of Fundy over to Maine. And back then, if they had a good day, they could make 100 miles a day in a ship. But sometimes they'd have no wind or bad weather, and it'd take them 14 days to get there.
Okay.
But they could make it in a couple of days. So some of them went over there. A small group of them stayed behind to resist, and they blended into the forest and fought the French for quite a while till they were captured. But the bulk of them went back on Alexander's ships. And that's when I think they made the stop at Oak Island for a month or 2 until the weather cleared, and they knew they could safely go across. Well, when I was thinking about all this with the years, because the Alexanders were at New Ross till 54, and he got it in 21. So I looked up some of the at the time, it was the only carbon dating records I could find. And two of them were done for Fred Nolan. One was done for Dan Blankenship. And they varied in the years, but if you charted out the years on a bar graph, the only time period where all 3 of them would fit was 1620 to 1660. And my story takes place from 1621 to 1656. So it's dead center in this carbon dating time period. Well, so I thought this was my unique theory, and I've definitely taken it way farther than anybody. But I happened to be looking at after my book was all done and everything. I was looking at Mark Finnan wrote. He was an early author about Oak Island, and he wrote in a book called The First Nova Scotian. It was about William Alexander, and he speculated right at the end of the book that with all of Alexander's connections, and he specifically pointed to the carbon dating on Oak Island being at the same time period as Alexander's experience in Nova Scotia, that he had to have known what took place on Oak Island, because there just weren't very many people there, and he owned all of Nova Scotia. So when I read that, I thought, holy cow, that's the same, that's essentially my theory, except that I've taken it 100 miles further. But this is a guy who was writing 20, 30 years ago, and he at least speculated in the same area. And then I found another guy, Court Lindahl. He wrote a gigantic book. He explores all kinds of theories. He isn't stuck on any one, but one of the ones that he explored was the Alexander family. He didn't talk about the carbon dating or anything, but in fact, he's the person that I learned about Alexandria, Virginia being named for that family. So there's two other fairly respected Oak Island historians who at least took a couple steps down the path that I went down. And I actually talked to both of them. Mark is involved in a gazillion things right now. So he only had limited time, but I had quite a few emails with Court. And but they were both supportive of it because they both had an inkling of it on their own, So that's why, I mean, it's very pragmatic. And that's what I love about it. I mean, that doesn't mean that I don't, like I told you a story about, I think I'm getting help from somewhere. I firmly believe in that kind of stuff. The ancestors have helped me so much and all that. But when you're looking at the motives of the people of the time, their motives are very simple. I got to eat. And that guy has a better steak than I do. And I'm stronger than him, So, I mean, the motives are very pragmatic for the people of the time. And I think there was some religious part to it too, although I kind of think that sometimes, they use the excuse of religion in order to dominate somebody else or to take over a land or whatever, or I'm going to go there and I'm going to convert all the natives, but basically I'm going to take all their gold, just like the Spanish did, with the Incas and Mayans and all that, that we're going to go there and convert them, and if they don't give us their gold, we're going to convert them into a pile of bones.
Right. So. Now, I've got another question for you. I know that there's been a lot of different theories on the show, or people that present different theories. Has there been any other theories that, or has there been any other paths you've gone down, or any theories that you've seen that have sparked your interest at all?
Well, no, I'd have to say no, because once I got on this, I was like a hound dog in a trail, and everything just has been coming at me steadily for over 2 years. And I mean, to think that all I was doing was sitting there watching TV and thought, gee, I ought to tell them about the Knights Baronet. And now I've been in the war room twice and filmed at Nova Scotia, and Rick's calling me on the phone and everything. I mean, I got a tiger by the tail, and some days I'm just barely hanging on to it, so I'm so anxious for people to know the theory, and obviously I want to sell books, but anybody that's published books knows that you don't get rich on book royalties, unless you're like John Meacham or somebody like that, they're making a fortune, but most people write books because they want to tell a story and get the story out. And that's my basic motive. And so particularly the newest book, because it gives the who, what, when, and why. But even the first book, I was pretty proud of the theories I came up with, Glooskap and Zichmini from the Zeno narratives, that make a lot of sense. And if it doesn't make sense, I mean, I don't necessarily throw it out right away, but I don't continue down that path. It's got to ring a bell, or I'm not going to waste time on it, because there's just too much to look at. That. So I have to say no about that. And I don't mean to badmouth anybody. I think some of the theorists, I think, at least they're presenting a heartfelt theory with something to back it up. And then there's other ones that are just blowing smoke. And those are the ones that drive me nuts, because I think, well, I know you've got film footage up to Gigi here, and you're showing, this guy, and I mean, at least, but it's not my call, and it's not even the Lagina's call. It's Prometheus. And the thing about it is, you cannot fault them for two reasons. One is, we wouldn't know anything about what's going on Oak Island if it wasn't for Prometheus. Mm-hmm. And number two, they've got the number one show, generally speaking, in their time slot during the season. So they have to know what they're doing. So who am I sitting here in Pennsylvania to tell them anything about what they're doing? But it does, drive you up the wall a little bit some days. And it's almost like they play a game like, this week we're going to give you a wacko guy, and then next week we're going to give you a pretty good guy, and keep you guessing, I guess, or whatever. And they do like to keep you guessing. I want to tell you, it's like, I always say, it's like the mob and the CIA and the FBI to get anything out of them until they want to give you something, and then you'll get a landslide. But it's a lot of a one-way street. But I know that they have to do that, and they have so many considerations. People don't have any idea how long they film just to get 5 or 10 minutes. They have to have paperwork galore, like all the trucks and drilling rigs, all that has to be, legal and paperwork. All the tours, which are sold out at like a Jimmy Buffett concert, they sell out so fast. Booking the theorists and getting them a room, getting them a car rental to get down there. It's just endless. Even the museum, if they get something on loan, like I gave a postcard to a museum, and that generated like 6 pieces of paper, with signature. I had to sign off on something and everything. And all it was a postcard that I probably would have thrown away if I didn't think the museum wanted it. So, there's just endless stuff going on in the background that nobody sees. And it's easy to be
it looks so easy to us, but it's a ton of work. It's a ton.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We're like all the Monday morning quarterbacks, but they're the guys in there playing the game. And it isn't just guys. That's one of the deceiving things. Everybody thinks it's a big testosterone show or something, but there's one lady in particular, and I won't. She does not want her name said, but they say behind every great man is a woman. Well, she's the woman behind all those great men. She takes care of all those details, and she was the one that actually got me there in the first place, because she was so enthralled with the theory. And
is she part of
volunteers?
I'm sorry. Is she part of the Prometheus, or is she part of? Is she with somebody that's on the show?
She's part of Oak Island. Yeah,
okay,
she's part of Oak Island. Okay. And what I view her as is she's like the producer for the Oak Island team. That's the liaison with the producers from Prometheus. Okay. And she actually produced. She is a producer in her own right. She actually produced the Nova Scotia film footage for the Titanic movie. So she's she's not a small fry in the business, but she wants to remain anonymous, because it's crazy. Like, that's why Rick doesn't answer email. He's getting a million emails. His phone number was out there, he'd get 1 million phone calls, you know.
Right.
I mean, literally, you have 3.5 million people watching the show. And even with me now that my email's out there, oh my God, after I was on the show, I got so many emails and messages and texts and all that, and even a few phone calls. And but some of the people have had some good information, you know, that they said, oh, I saw your theory, and did you know such and such, you know? And so I'm actually working with a few people, sewing up a couple of directions here and there, where one of the guy's idea is fantastic. I haven't even passed it on yet. Well, no, I did. That's right, I did the other day. But he said, well, if they did DNA on the bones in the that they found in H8, remember they found the European bone and the Middle Eastern bone.
Yes.
Well, couldn't they work with a DNA firm like, I like Family Tree DNA. That's who I always work through. And just say, you know, can you do a comparison for us? We'll pay you to do a comparison of this guy's DNA with your DNA bank, and we'll find out potentially what his name was, but we'll certainly find out, you know, we could find out what town he came from, or what part of Scotland he came from, or whatever. Or maybe he's French. It just said European. Maybe he's French, not Scottish, you know.
Right.
And I don't know if they did that, but I never had even thought of that. And he descends from a Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia too. And so that was his thinking, that what if it's my DNA or his DNA or the DNA of one of these Knights Baronet families, you know. Certainly most of them would say, yeah, if they have a record somewhere, they say, yeah, compare it to my record and see if we match, because that could be my 18th great grandfather laying there at the bottom of the money pit.
Now that's,
you know, so
now that I would, do you know if that's possible to take DNA from something? I'm wondering if there's DNA left being in the ground.
They did. Yeah, they did DNA on those two. And in the bone marrow. And one of them was European and one of them was Middle Eastern, and they dated from the mid 1600s to the mid 1700s. Well, you know what? I might be wrong on that. They might have only done carbon dating on them. Because the DNA would be what would tell them where they were from. Carbon dating would just tell the time period. So they did DNA.
Well, I wonder why they didn't. Nobody's tracked that down. I'm surprised. You know, one of the things I love about the show is the Laginas are so thorough. They they have stuff, they don't find something and say, well, that's this, they send it out to be tested. They talk to experts in their field. I love that about the show. And I think some people make fun of the show. You're always going to have because they are so thorough and, they didn't find much this week. Well, there's been constant digging there since 1795. There's been so much going on. Right. It's going to take a long time to sift through all that and see what they've. And I love how they track it down. If you watch a lot of shows like this, you're left with a lot of questions. And I'm not saying it's there. It hasn't brought up some more questions, but I love how thorough everything is, and their process to eliminate and understand better has been phenomenal. I think that is a big success. I mean, I think the characters that we get to see are as I watch the show, and I would say you'd probably agree after meeting them, everybody's just seems like genuinely good people that have a passion to find out what's there, what was there. And you brought up earlier about Gary. You didn't know his reputation in the metal detecting community. I've never heard anything but good. Now, I didn't know he was so funny and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But I've heard great things about him. Some of the people, like I said, I do the UK show every Thursday, and he's obviously, I believe, from England or some of the people over in England
Yes.
have met him, and
Yes.
they say wonderful things about him. I've never heard a bad thing. So, and I think that's a big thing they've got going for them. But the Laginas and their passion for this, and to really get to the bottom of it, and methodically figuring each and every find out and everything they can find out. I think it's brilliant. I love it. James, are you ready to get to some of the questions? We've only got a few so far, but they're kind of getting away from me in the chat.
Yeah, and just along those lines first, before we do, to point out, to prove what you're saying, just this phone conversation today about me partnering with this other guy, even though we have somewhat opposing theories, we're both on the track of the same guy. They're looking for that synergy that the two of us could bring to that William Phipps story, and then also the guy that found the stag silverware diving on a wreck. And so they're like saying, they're not just taking my word for it. They're doing exactly what you said. They want to get to the bottom of it. Even though they're not disrespecting me, they're also testing me. You know, they want somebody else. They want double verification or triple verification if they can get it. Mm-hmm. But the other thing, real quick, that I'll say is that they're just like you see them on the show, as I said earlier. And so I was on the phone with Rick about a month ago, and I said, you know what appealed to me appealed to me about the show in the beginning was that it was just like as if I got my buddy and said, grab your chainsaw and your shovel and throw them in the pickup and see if Billy will bring his backhoe, and we're going to go up and figure this damn thing out. And he said, that's exactly what it's been right along. It's just the hometown boys, and we're just doing our level best to figure this thing out. And so that's what adds that sense of authenticity to it. But like you said, they take it that step further and say, okay, yeah, we're having fun. We're looking for treasure on an island, but at the same time, we'd like somebody to prove what it is that we found. And so it's just a neat combination of those two things. And I know people get frustrated, and believe me, I get frustrated too. Some nights with some of the things that are shown or not shown, or we didn't get the answer we wanted, or we didn't get an answer at all, or whatever. And I'll just be going nuts, but then I'm right back the next week. Right. And I would do it whether I was on the show or not. I mean, I'm a fan of the show, regardless of me being involved with the show. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'll take some questions.
Here's a couple real quick. Ask James if the Norse have history in Nova Scotia.
Well, they know that for sure they have history in Newfoundland at that, I think they call it Loss on Meadows, and they found tons of artifacts. They also know that they went further south because they found a certain type of a tree nut, and I think maybe grape products that don't grow in Newfoundland, or don't naturally grow there. So they know that they had gone south to get that and brought it back up to Newfoundland. And of course, one of the first places you would hit going south would be Nova Scotia. But there is a theory out there about New Brunswick, which actually was part of Nova Scotia originally, and it's connected to it. There's a site there that geographically matches one of the sagas, one of the Erickson sagas. They haven't found any artifacts, but when they read the saga and look at the lay of the land, they're like, this is identical. So they're working on trying to prove, or I guess disprove, that New Brunswick site could have been a Viking site. But, when you go down, the St. Lawrence is right up above Nova Scotia, and that goes right down to the Great Lakes. You go across the Great Lakes to the end, and you get close to the Kensington. I think the Kensington stone, ruined stone, is only 100 miles from the end of one of the lakes there.
Wow.
And the Vikings went everywhere. They went to Russia. They went to They went to Italy, France. They were all over. So is the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes, are they going to stop them? They wanted to go wherever they wanted to go, and generally nobody was going to stop them. And things were getting bad in Greenland and Iceland with using up the lumber and all of that. So they were looking for warmer weather. So I don't have any problem in believing that they made it to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, even down into the Newport Tower, maybe, I don't know, but certainly over to, I think it's in Wisconsin where I'm probably wrong on that, but where the Kensington Stone is, because it was all, you could get to all of it by water. And if the Vikings were nothing else, they were sailing,
Absolutely.
And the one thing about their boats was they were shallow draft. And so that gets you, into rivers and places where a ship couldn't. Speaking of that, the water, Doug Kroll showed me two different depth chart reports. One was done by an American firm, and one, I believe, was done by the Nova Scotia government. And they showed the water not too far off the shore of Oak Island to be up to 30 foot deep in places. And so I looked up the draft of a ship from the 1600s, and it was only 12 to 16 foot. So you have plenty of room to pull a ship within reason of Oak Island, certainly close enough that you could take a smaller boat into shore.
Yeah.
And you could hide there from the storm. Well, he also told me that there was a direct wind tack from the open ocean to Oak Island. So I looked that up on my own, and I found there's a yacht club in Mahone Bay, and they actually have a map for their people to follow that brings them right in from the open ocean all the way to the yacht club. And all you would have to do is turn left for a few hundred feet, and you'd be at Oak Island. So that verified what Doug had told me. So if you're going, if you're trying to get away from an Atlantic storm, which is my theory, you're going to take that wind tack right to the back of the bay and get on the first island you can. And so, the water was deep enough. Because some people have said, there's no way the water would have been deep enough. Well, there's two reports that show that it would. And even if it was only half that deep back then, which there's no reason why it would have been, it still would have been deep enough. Because the draft was on,
So the next question, how many ships manifest have you come across that had a destination for Oak Island? I would guess that's slim to none. I would suspect it wasn't
zero.
Okay.
Zero. Now, and in fact, I haven't found an actual manifest for anything, but the stated goal of Alexander's four known fleets that he sent there was Nova Scotia, all three of them. Now, I think that why he wanted something at New Ross, if you were going to attack an enemy on the other side of almost an island, it's not quite an island, but you would want to establish a beachhead, because you wouldn't want to sail for 5 to 6 to 7 weeks, and assuming you had good weather to sail, and then go directly into battle. You'd want to get there, get some food, water, again, you got to survive, be prepared, then go and make your attack. So I think New Ross and Mahone Bay area was where he was establishing his beachhead to take on the French.
Okay.
And
interesting. Yeah. Next question. Do you believe the treasure's still on the island, or has it already been removed?
Well, I think some of it is, but this is another theory out of my book that'll blow your mind. But John Strachan owned the Nolan Cross lots. His uncle William was one of the first investors in the Bank of Nova Scotia. He was also one of the first Freemasons in Halifax. And the original purpose of the Strachan treasure, I call it the Alexander and Strachan treasure, was to finance Nova Scotia. And so if the Strachan family knew something about that treasure being there, and if they found it, because he sold his lots in 1857, and there was a lot of work done between 1804, when they know the syndicates got involved, and 1861, I think, when the pit collapsed. There was a lot of work done, but it's not been documented well. So if they found some of that treasure, a likely place to put it would be into a, they actually formed a bank. He was one of the original directors and investors. Well, the brother-in-law of another Oak Island landowner was also an original director and investor. And guess where the Bank of Nova Scotia held its first few meetings? At Dalhousie University. So, I mean, it's just, I mean, if it isn't the actual story, then it's one hell of a bunch of coincidences. Not one, but a bunch of them. Just endless coincidences. And they're documents. They're not like I'm saying, oh, wouldn't it be cool? I'm found a document that said that they met there. That Dalhousie was founded by the guy that was the Grand Master of the Scottish Freemasons, and so if some of it was found, that would be a possible place where it would have went to be invested in the Bank of Nova Scotia. But if you think of the money pit itself, it appears as though, well, at least by 1795, it appears as though it was kind of virgin treasure hunting ground. They said the ground was softer there, but it was still filled in. So the McGinnises, their descendants, say that they found some treasure in there, and they stayed on the island. Vaughan, I believe it was Vaughan, I hope I don't get this wrong, but I believe it was Vaughan, sold his land the same exact year that John Strachan sold his Nolan Cross lots. They both sold to the same guy. His name was Graves. And another thing that's interesting for my theory is that Gilbert Hedden, who owned a good share of Oak Island in the 30s, he's the one that built the road by the swamp there. Okay. And he wrote FDR, who, as we all know, was not only a Mason, but an investor in Oak Island, and actually searched there at least 1 year, and a lot of people say it was for 2 years. Well, he wrote him a letter, which still exists, that says that he felt, based on different things than my theory, but I think it was based on mapping, but that he felt the money pit was built in 1635. Well, you can imagine how happy I was when I found that little bit of information, because I'm saying 1632, and an active searcher and landowner who's tied in with President Roosevelt is saying 1635. So anyway, there's an awful lot that could point to my theory being correct. I suppose everybody thinks their theory is correct, but I've just gone so overboard with the evidence and the documents and everything. That, I mean, it even boggles my own mind that there was that much out there. It was in bits and pieces, just like they're finding a Bobby Dazzler here and another Bobby Dazzler on the other side. Well, that's what I'm getting Bobby Dazzlers out of all these old books and stuff. But that's what I like to do. So that's what I'm doing.
That is so interesting. So the guy who wrote FDR, how did he come to his date? Do you know?
I think it was based on the way maps were drawn, if I remember right. That's what sticks in my brain, that it was based on the way maps were drawn. And I don't know what maps he was referring to or whatever, but I read the letter. In fact, I'm sure I have a digital copy of the letter. somewhere. But I mean, I was so focused on 1635 that I wasn't as worried about how he came up with the date, just the fact that he did come up with that date.
The next thing is a statement, and I'm going to back this up 100%. Bill Marsh says, if James has a line to contact Rick, urge him to get his Lyme disease tested again. Bill has been struggling with Lyme disease for years, and if I remember the story correctly, it wasn't diagnosed for a lot of years correctly, even though they tested for it and stuff. Lyme disease, if Rick hasn't studied up on that, it is bad. It can be very bad. And I know you've got so many important things to talk to him about when you talk to him. Take 5 seconds and say, hey, keep getting that tested.
Okay.
It can be horrible.
You know, I've never talked about that particular subject, but I have asked him how he was doing and how he's feeling. I asked Doug and I asked this lady behind the scenes, and they both told me that he was exhausted at the end of this last season. But Doug said, I've never seen anybody so dedicated, because he works like 10, 12 hours a day.
Right.
And this lady told me that he was there 7 days a week. So whether he had Lyme disease or not, if you're in your later 60s, you're going to be exhausted. But nobody's, you know, I think, you know, he deserves and expects a certain amount of privacy. So they have to respect that too. So if I ask, how's his Lyme disease, they're going to say, you know, in a roundabout way, none of your business. But yeah, right. I can definitely pass that on. I email him a lot, but again, he doesn't answer emails. He only answered one time, but Doug does and Craig does. Craig's such a nice, they're both nice guys. All of them are nice guys, but they're just different when you get an answer. If you get an email from Craig, it's a different. Doug is very much, let's go, come on, where's the, you know, and Craig is very much, thank you so much, you know. But today was the 4th phone call from Rick, and I tell you, the first couple times I was sitting down and I felt like I had to sit down on another chair. You know, I mean, I was just like, what? Rick Lagina, you know, and he's so polite and respectful. Today I was up on a ladder with a hose in the eaves trough, cleaning the eaves out, and he called and I said, let me get down. I said, I'm at the top of a ladder with a hose cleaning my eaves, but hold on a minute, I'll be down. He said, well, no, that's okay. I'll call you back. I said, no, he won't. He'll call me back. Hold on. I'll get down. I went down and shut the hose off and went and sat down real quick. He said, well, I didn't mean to take it from your work. I said, don't believe me. I'd much rather talk to you than clean leaves out of a gutter. You know, I mean, that's like one of the worst chores. So, but somebody's got to do it.
Right.
That's me.
You know. I think we've got one last question. Oh, excuse me. How often is Gary on site detecting? Did you happen to see any of that while you were there? Enough to be able to?
Well, I have at least a partial answer on that. He told me himself that he's not there all the time. He said they prepare an area that they want me to detect, and then they'll bring me in, and sometimes it's for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and they put me up, because they put him up at the same hotel where they put me at, and that's why I got to drink beer with him. And he said, but a lot of people think I'm part of the team there all the time, all summer long, and I'm not, because I've got a lot of other things in the works. But he said I am here quite often. So, I mean, he's got a half a home there anyway, but the rest of them are. Now, Doug works at a College of Geographic Sciences over closer to Port Royal. He's about 50-mile drive away, but he's over there all the time, and the guy's just gung-ho. And I mean, I'm talking, they're serious about it. When we were talking about that medallion and everything, there was no showmanship or dilly-dallying or anything. It was like, let's get the guy, let's twist his cousin's arm, tell him to twist that guy's arm, show us where you found it. We met the owners of New Ross Foundation, Tim and Alessandra, absolutely great people. I had a great conversation with them, and we all filmed up. The only problem with filming up there was the black flies or deer flies, whatever, were so bad that day that everybody's arms were swinging, and Tim had sprayed us all with spray, but it wasn't cutting it. And there was one of the Prometheus guys, he was covered from head to toe, and he had like a ski mask with just his eyeballs showing. He was a drone operator. And it was so hot. It was so hot, and he was dressed from head to toe except his eyeballs. I thought, well, being hot right now would be a relief from getting. I got 9 deer fly bites there that day, and then suffered with them for days. But you got to take what you can get. And but anyway, so and I wanted to tell you that on the way up there, I rode in one of those vans with the secret hidden cameras, so you couldn't see them anywhere. I don't know where they had them, but it was just me and Doug and Rick, and again, they didn't coach us or anything. We just naturally we're going to be talking about New Ross and Oak Island and the Medallion and all that. And but the subject of the parchment came up because I was talking about my theory, expanding on my theory about how could it be dry after 93 years in water. And he said, I have that. And I said, what? And he said, I own that parchment. And I'm like, you're kidding. I didn't even know the thing still existed beyond photos. And I don't know. I didn't ask him, who'd you buy it from? Maybe from Dan. I don't know. Whatever. And I would have loved to have seen it in person. But I don't know if you noticed, but this season was the first season where they actually showed it. And they put it in that room, in that archive room they have. They actually put it under the microscope, and you could see the letters and all of that. It's very small. He said that they tested it, and it's absolutely parchment. They have not tested the ink or done DNA, because you can actually DNA parchment if you're lucky, and you can carbon date it, but he said it will destroy it. It's so small that it will destroy at least a good chunk of it, so they're hesitant to do that. They could do the parchment test without damaging it at all, but they would have to scrape the ink to try to figure out what it was, so he said we're still debating about what we're going to do with that. And another little insider thing about that archive room, he told me last spring that in a phone conversation that he was going to build an archive area, that he had got the partners to all agree to it, and they put aside quite a bit of money. And he wanted a place that was away from the TV cameras and the tourists, where just researchers could go. And he said maybe like a team of 6 people and just sit there and go through the paperwork and say, is this crap, or is this worth keeping, or where should this be stored? What part of, whatever. And so I think what happened, and I should probably ask him, but when I'm on the phone, believe me, I don't ask him fan questions when I'm on the phone with them. I mean, it's right down to the nitty gritty of what we're talking about today, period, and I don't like to keep them too long. I mean, my God, I'd talk to them for 5 hours if I could, but I usually try to keep it down to a half hour. But anyway, I think what happened with that little tiny house they brought was that when they didn't know Xena was going to die, and when she died and she left him all that paperwork, they didn't have a place for it. And he had the intentions of building, a grand archive room, but he had to do something with all that paperwork. So I think they made a deal with that Irving Equipment to bring that little tiny house on there, to turn that into their archive room temporarily until they can either bring a bigger tiny house or actually build some kind of hurricane-proof archive building or something to store all that valuable stuff. But he told me, he said, there is so much stuff out there. He said, there's families all over that have Oak Island stuff, and a lot of people want to donate it to us, and we don't have any room for it anywhere. He said, that's why we need this room. I actually know of a lady who she's pretty sure she has the largest collection of memorabilia from Oak Island, like signs and tickets and shirts and things like that. And she said she wants to donate the entire thing. Well, that right there would probably fill up their museum. So, they and So, and probably Dan, I mean, you can imagine what he had in his house, in his basement and everything.
Yeah.
That I know I saw that one scene where he had just rows of file cabinets, and they asked him a question. He went right over to the right file cabinet and pulled it right out and showed it to him.
Did you happen to meet him while you were on the island?
No, I didn't meet him or Alex. I met everyone but him and Alex. And I really wished I would have met Dan. I don't know what he would have thought of my theory, but just the fact that he's the legend that he was, it would have been so nice, you know, to shake his hand at least.
Yeah, you know, this is maybe not right to say. I would say, you know, you're watching TV, you're not meeting the guy in person. He kind of seemed, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but I would say in the very beginning of the show, to me, he come across as really hard, more of a worker type. You know, I wouldn't have imagined what a brilliant man he was, but I think that really can't come out later. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you probably felt that way as you watched the show as well. I mean, this guy put everything into it, but he just, you know, he come across as just your common working, you know, get it done, go dig that hole. But he was a brilliant man, I believe, absolutely brilliant.
And you know, two things. One is that Rick, on the phone call before this one, I said something about Dan. I said, I know, this was shortly after Dan died, and I said, I know you guys, I said, I haven't been sending you so much because I know you guys knew Dan so well, and I'm sure that there's a lot going on up there that I don't know anything about. And he said, you know, he pulled a fast one on us. I said, what do you mean? He said, we had no idea he was going. We had no chance to, you know, say goodbye or make any arrangements or anything. He said the last time I saw him, he was sharp as a tack, you know, and he said, next thing I know, he's gone. And but the other guy I was going to mention was Dan Henske, because, you know, he doesn't talk much. And on the show, you know, he comes off obviously like he's a worker, you know, and they do ask him questions once in a while. But the guy, he's got writings. You can find them online. He was documenting everything just to the nth degree. Like, you know, I was just amazed. I'm thinking, Dan Henske wrote this. That this is so detailed of a report about a certain dig they did or whatever. And so I think that like you said, the TV can't show you everything, and it can show you personalities, because Dan Henske is a very quiet person without any question, but it can't show you the depth of people. And one other character would be Dave. So, you know, he has that one word that he likes to say a lot that they have to bleep. I think you know which word I'm talking about. So here we are. We're our first visit in 2017, and my wife and I are there, and we're sitting on the old war room front porch there with Rick and a bunch of guys, everybody but Marty. And here comes Dave, and my wife goes, "There's the bleep bleep man." And everybody laughed, and he goes, "You're effing right." No, he didn't say effing. And he hadn't even met us yet. And we were in mixed company and everything, and he did not care one bit. He just blurted it right out. And then, of course, everybody laughs because he makes it be a common joke instead of a terrible thing to say, you know. But I had some interesting conversations with him off to the side. And there's some things that I've been told that, you know, you just don't want to break somebody's confidence or whatever, you know, that they've told you certain things. So you know, you have to know where the borderline is. But he told me some comical things too, you know. I mean, if they ever piss me off, by God, the fourth book is going to be a tell-all. It'll be the Oak Island tell-all. I'll tell all the secrets that I heard, you know. But no, I would never do that. They have treated me with such respect, and they paid for everything I got to tell you 2 stories about Rick. I know we could go on all night, but so the first year, my wife wanted to sit in the war room while I gave my presentation, and Prometheus said, "No, you can't. We've never ever let anybody in the war room during a presentation that wasn't either on the Oak Island team or the person giving the presentation." Excuse me. So she was pretty dejected, but when she goes shopping. So she went and got in the big truck that we rented, and she was heading across the causeway, just starting to head across the causeway in this big truck to go to one of the tourist traps there to spend money. And she hears a hammering on the truck, and she stops, and here it's Rick Lagina, and he says, "I put my foot down. You're going to be in the room." So she came back, and so they said, "All right, you can be in here, but you don't cough, you don't applaud, you don't laugh, you don't make a peep. You sit in that corner and be quiet." I thought, my God, I've been trying to get her to sit in a corner for years and be quiet, and I haven't ever been successful.
Good luck, guys.
But the other thing that happened was then when Prometheus called me I keep saying this year, but in 2018, they only wanted to pay for me for 2 days. I was just going to fly in, stay over, do my thing, stay over again, and fly back out. So I said, "Well, would it be okay if I pay for the extra days? I'd like to stay maybe 5 days or something." And they said, "Yeah, as long as you pay for them, that's okay." And I said, "But last year you guys paid for my wife." And he said, "Well, that was because the Laginas really wanted you up there, and they kind of led that whole thing. But we have policies, we only pay for the theorist." And he said, "You can imagine, we can't do this for everybody. We have to stick to our guns,"
right.
Which I understand, business and all that. So I said, "All right." So she was, again, a little put off. So about a week goes by, and Rick calls, and he says, "Hey, I hear your wife can't come up. They're not going to pay for her." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I tried to talk them into it, but they said that it's against their policy, and they got to stick to their guns and all that." He said, "Yeah, I know they do." He said, "I'll pay for her." He said, "You guys come and stay as long as you want, and I'll pick up everything that they don't pay." And I said, "Oh my God, you're kidding me." And he said, "No," he said, "I know she's been proofreading your book. She's part of it too. And I know you would want her up here. And so don't worry about it. When you get all done, whatever Prometheus doesn't pay, you give me the receipts for her, and I will." And he did. Wow. And I'm just floored. Now, how nice can a person be? And so that shows me, for one thing, that he so strongly wants to believe this theory, and whether he 100% believes it or not, he definitely wants to go down this road. And I know Doug does too, because Doug and I have shared a lot of projects off to the side and he would say, "I found this on a map. Can you look this up? Is this Scottish or can you find this book?" There was this one book, it was a Freemason book, but it had 12 Templar treasures held by the Freemasons. Now, you think Templar treasure, you think, the Ark of the Covenant or whatever, but these were more like collectibles. Like they were a set of gold-plated stirrups that a Templar wore. There was a helmet. There was a battle flag. I can't remember them all, but they were written in French in the back of this book. Well, nobody could find the book because the lady that identified it had been slightly wrong on the name. She said it was by James Burnette. It was actually by James Burns. So I went through all my people in Scotland, the 3 biggies, the antiquaries, the museums, and the records. They had no idea what we were talking about either. And I don't know why, but it was a typo. Maybe I typed his last name in wrong or whatever, but I found the book. So I didn't know the treasures were going to be listed in French. The rest of the book was in English. Oddly enough, they made the treasures in French. So I used the Google translator, and I went in and translated every one of those 12 treasures for Doug and this lady. And, I was looking for the big one, the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail or something, but it was written in the early 1800s, and it was written by a Freemason to the Grand Master saying, "This is what we hold in Templar treasures." And then, as I say, they were more like Templar collectibles, like you would see them in a museum, whatever. But, so that was pretty cool. to find that. So different projects like that we've worked on that haven't necessarily done anything for my theory, but it was just cool to be working with Doug on them. And he works at that College of Geographic Sciences, the one that did the depth sounding, they were looking for a place to dive there about a month ago. He works there, and they have a library that has all these old books on Scotland and Nova Scotia. And I mean, a lot of them, some of them anyway, are one of a kind. And they have all these old maps, and these maps are in these drawers where you open the slide, it's a thin drawer, and you open it and you have kid gloves on, and you pick the map up by two, bring it over to the table, and then they say, don't touch it. You can look at it, but don't touch it, And so when I was going up in 2017, the lady behind the scenes said, we're going to send you about 50 miles across Nova Scotia to where Doug is, to his private library, because we want you to see what's there before you give your presentation. So it was great. The only problem it had for me was I had done an audio visual that first year, and everything he gave me was on paper. So I'm sitting there in the war room trying to think how can I show, how do I blend, where does the paper fit to my audio visual? And then how do I segue into, and by the way, yesterday, Doug and I found this, whatever. Right. So that was where my mind was. But so I had my own, now I'm a storyteller, but I'm going to tell at least one last one here. So I had my own Curse of Oak Island story. So this last year when we went, we're staying at, it used to be called the Atlantica. I think they call it the Oak Island Resort now. And we got this big honking truck, and we'd been out the night before and everything. So we get to, Doug or somebody calls and says, okay, you're going to get a call in a few hours to come over to the island to get this thing started. I said, all right, we'll be ready. So I'm going around getting all my paperwork and making sure everything's ready, and I can't find the truck keys. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I got it. They're going to call me any minute. Can't find the truck keys. So we tore the room apart looking for them, looking through all the luggage and everything. Couldn't find them. We called the staff. They came into the room. They took the beds apart. They went all around the edges of the carpet. They couldn't find them. They went to the garbage. They asked us where we came in at, and they went to where all that garbage was dumped. Went through the garbage trying to find them. In the meantime, I called the rental place. I think it was Enterprise. And they said it's going to be $700 and some for us to come out there to unlock the door and get in there and make a new key, because we don't have a duplicate key, which sounds very fishy, but I don't want to bash Enterprise, but I can't believe you'd own a big truck like that and not have two sets of keys. But anyway, right. And I'm thinking, there's no way in heck I'm paying $750. I'll walk over to the island. Probably take me a half hour, an hour, but I got to go home. I got to go to the airport at some point. So I called another locksmith, just an individual, and he said, well, actually, I'm on my way over now, but I won't get there for about an hour because I got to make a quick stop. And I told him about $750. He said, oh my gosh. He said, I'm not charging anything like that. He said, I'll get that. We'll open up the truck, see if the keys are in there. So I'm waiting for him. So I'm sitting there just frustrated as can be, because I'm thinking any minute these guys are going to call, and I'm not going to have a way over there, and I still got to solve this truck problem. And so we hear a knock on the door, and it was the night manager, and he had found the keys right inside the door where I dropped them when I came home from drinking. And
I like how he hesitated.
And his office was right up that hallway, so he just took them and threw them on his desk and locked up his office and went home. And so he didn't come in. He didn't start his shift till 2:00. So when he came in, he found those keys. He went up to the front desk and said, hey, by the way, I found these keys last night. And they're like, oh my God, there's a guy sitting there waiting for him for 2 hours. So we were hugging them, everything, and racing out the door. Luckily, it's only about a 5 or 10 minute drive down It's a 5-minute drive, but the road's so rough, it's a 10-minute drive. It really is rough down there. And I'm thinking the whole time, well, there's Murphy of Murphy's Law lives right nearby Oak Island somewhere. Absolutely guarantee you he lives there somewhere because of that going wrong. But anyway, all's well that ends well. So
right, made it. That's awesome.
Yeah, made it.
James, we're getting really close to running out of recording time. But what I would like to say is please come back on the show. We would absolutely love to have you on again. You tell great stories. You're passionate about it. Please come back on. We would love to have you. And if it's okay, after the show, in the next couple of days, I will touch base with you and we will line something up or figure out where we go next, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that sounds great. And, Rick said in that scene there, that last scene, we're not done with you yet. And today, not only did I get a phone call from him, but I got an email from Prometheus, and they want to call me in the next couple of days. I have no idea what the subject matter is, but Rick said he warned me, or not warned me, he gave me advance notice, and he said, don't think it's anything bad, because it's not. But he said that's between them and you, not me. So they aren't done with me, and that doesn't prove that there's going to be a season 7, because I think the way it works is that Prometheus films with the hope that there's going to be a season, but they still have to negotiate with history. So they've got the Laginas negotiating with Prometheus, and then Prometheus negotiating with history. And you can imagine all the lawyers involved and everything. So they never announced till really close to the season start. And I asked him about that in 2018, I guess it was. I said, it says all over the internet there's going to be a season 6. He said they're guessing. He said, I don't even know if there's going to be a season 6. Yeah. So that's how, and he also told me, he said, they filmed through the summer, but he said they're editing to the last minute. He said the episode that you're going to be on is probably going to be sent to New York to be broadcasted about a week before you're on, because they want to keep the storyline going the right direction. And, I don't know if they pay attention to social media and what people are saying, or if they just have their idea of what they're going to do and they're going to do it no matter what. But I did have a clue I was going to be on, because they requested some verification of what book I found certain things in and what page number they were on and all that. So they wouldn't have been asking those questions if I wasn't going to be on. But I honestly didn't know that I had no absolute word I was going to be on until Rick called 2 weeks beforehand. He said, there's only a few episodes left. You're absolutely going to be on, but I can't even tell you which one it's going to be because I don't know. But that's the first time. So that's how late. I mean, I've been, like I said, I'm just like having a baby. It's been like 9 months waiting. And I didn't want to publish my book because I'd be spilling the beans, and I signed an NDA, of course. So the NDAs are interesting. There's like 6 points on them, but the two principal ones are you don't announce you're going to be on the show until they do. Well, I couldn't anyway because I didn't know if I was going to be on the show.
Right.
Nobody would say yes or no. And the other one is that you don't badmouth Prometheus. Well, I don't have any reason to badmouth them because, look what they've done for me. It putting me up in the hotel and renting a car and paying for the flights and giving me a shot with my theory and all that. My God, if anything, I got to kiss their feet,
Right.
But and they're really nice guys too. And the one guy, the executive producer there, he told us, he said, people don't realize it, but he said, I got to worry about how big the stones are. how big the gravel here is, because we have so many people walking through there. If somebody trips and falls, guess who gets blamed? He said, goes on me. So he said, you would not believe the list of things that I personally am responsible for that you would never think an executive producer would be responsible for. But he said, I am. And by the way, here's a little secret that I haven't told anybody. But one of the guys that was there working on the crew this last year had worked on Naked and Afraid for quite a while. And I don't know if you ever watched that show, Naked and Afraid. And so, of course, I was drilling him for how real that was. And he said, oh, it's real, believe me. He said, but you know what they don't show is that the people are mad at each other for a good share of the time, and they're so tired that they sleep a lot, or at least lay down a lot. And there's days go by, they don't even talk to each other because they're so mad at each other. But he said they got to take their anger out on somebody. And he said we had one group snuck into our food supply and stole some of that. He said, but he said everything else is what you see is what you get on there. And he said, think about it. They got to be there 21 days, and we're only an hour-long show. So he said we shoot a lot of footage that never gets used because we're just looking for the highlights to make a good 1 hour show out of 21 days, you know. But
James,
so
I totally get that. I have a YouTube channel, and that's what I do is I go out and record, while I'm metal detecting, and I have so much footage sometimes that, I have to go through it, edit out the pieces that, I don't want, but people don't realize, you're out there 6 hours of metal detecting, and you may only find 3 really good finds that are worth putting in that video. So there's a lot of stuff that people don't see, and they don't see the behind the scenes of all of the so much research that goes in, to a lot of y'all's stuff too. But I mean, there's just so much time in the editing and getting everything and planning that goes behind the scenes for y'all.
And I felt kind of sorry for them because my theory was so complex that these poor guys that never heard it before, the Prometheus team, they're saying to themselves, how the heck am I going to get 2 hours of complex theory into a 5-minute segment, right. and they at least gave me about 10 minutes instead. But that wasn't without them asking a whole lot of questions after the fact, and me identifying a lot of stuff. But I agree with you. And I've watched a lot. I don't think I've ever seen yours. I'll have to look you up, but I've watched a lot of metal detecting videos just because it's so fascinating and they're get so excited and then it's a piece of crap, but then all of a sudden they find a silver dollar from 18 something or other, and they're like doing the happy dance and everything. And there's probably a whole lot more pieces of junk than happy dances, but they doesn't make for good film. So
exactly. Absolutely. It's like this weekend I went metal detecting in the river, and I'm out there in the river for a good 4 hours of metal detecting. And, you're digging pennies and dimes and nickels and trash and pull tabs and all that. Of course, that stuff is boring. So they want to see the rings and the really cool finds you find. So, I totally get it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, my other experience with metal detecting, it was the same detector, and that was one of the reasons I rented it. It was the same, iron, find anything. But there was a lighthouse that I was, a group bought it, and they wanted to open it up to the public. It had been closed up since the last keeper left. And it was virgin territory because it's run by the Department of Natural Resources, and you actually weren't allowed to detect. But one of the people on the board said, hey, bring it up here and we'll just see what we can find. So honest to God, we found the pop caps, but we found 2 deck nails from a ship that were broke. They were laying right beside each other, about a foot down, exactly parallel, as much as you could line them up, and they were broken at the exact same spot. So obviously they were in a piece of wood that broke in a shipwreck, and then they landed there, and then the wood rotted away, and they stayed in that position. And then we found a little truck, and it was by a tree in the dirt, but it was down a few inches, and we traced it back to the only keepers that ever had a little boy that in their family that lived there, and they lived there during the time period that truck was manufactured. It was a little toy metal truck. And talk about, I know exactly what you guys are experiencing, because we're like, holy crap, we know the boy that lost us by the tree, because he's the only boy that never lived in that house. So then we decided, well, we better stop because we don't have the permit, and she was on the board, and neither one of us wanted to get in trouble. So I found a guy that was he worked for the VA, and he had a really good metal detector. And in fact, he bought some other items from me, not that had anything to do with the lighthouse or Oak Island. And he said, I'll go over there for nothing, and I'll scan that entire lighthouse for you. And so I made that offer, but they never picked up on it. They're going to have an archaeological team come in and dig up the privy and some other place where they think they're going to find a lot of stuff. But I think it's one of them places where you could, anywhere there's a path, just start running that detector on, because there's probably tools. There was a shed that the guy had to work in every day. There's probably tools in the ground right next on either side of it, or who knows what you're going to find. But it's virgin territory. But you got, when you get there's like 9 different agencies involved, literally, and every decision has to be run by 9 different committees. So you can imagine how slow. But they want to preserve history. But I think different people have different motives, and so that's what stalls a lot of things out. But anyway, that was actually my big find, was those little nails, which I didn't get to keep any of them, but the truck, because I was actually able to trace it right down to the year it was manufactured. Well, it was a range of years, but that was the same year that little kid lived there. So we were like flying high on that one. But so I can imagine if they'd have given me the whole grounds to do, and I would have had a real metal detector instead of
what you could have found.
Junker I had, what you guys could find by going over, so I know it's neat. I really probably will end up getting into it. If I find the time after writing these books, I'll probably get one and hit the beach here and the old dance hall grounds, and then move on from there wherever.
It sounds like you've already got some great spots to start out with, so.
Yeah,
you
well,
do.
We sure have enjoyed having you on the show tonight. I've learned a lot, and the history is just fascinating to me. So I can't wait to have you on again.
All right, well, I'll do it whenever.
James,
I'm sure by the next time I'll already have another whole wheelbarrow full of stuff, because it's just I've got islanditis bad, and I just. If it's a slow night for TV, which most nights anymore are, except for Curse of Oak Island, it's like I might as well go up there and look at something. And the next thing you know, I'm like, oh my God, look at this. Oh my God, I think I got a book on that. Let's go look in that book and whatever. And it just builds. It's frantic pace. And, when they say when you're doing something you enjoy, you don't pay any attention to the clock. And that's what happens. I come up here at like 9 o'clock because not everything sucks on TV. And then 2 a.m, I'm looking up at the computer going, oh my God, I didn't know it's 2 o'clock. I only got another half hour before I have to quit.
Yeah, that's funny. I find myself doing
anyway,
the same
it's been
thing.
Great. Yeah, my bad.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, James. I'll get in touch with you, and we'll see. We'll talk about when we can get together again.
Okay. Good luck with your show, and good luck with your metal detecting. I'll have to look you up, Gypsy.
All right.
Find
Thanks.
something
Zero
good.
Zero Discrimination YouTube, so check it out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
All right. Good night.
You have a great night.
Bye.
Good night, sir. Thank
night,
you
all.
so much. Had a blast. All right, there we go. It's boy, that's a long one. It was fun. It went by quick for me. I just here. I had to start watching the time because we were running out of time there. But what a blast! I hope you guys enjoyed it. Facebook. We dig the Civil War headquarters. Zero Discrimination. She started a new group. Gypsy started a new group. Girls Rock Metal Detecting, Ohio Relic Hunting, and Dirt Pirates Detecting. Some of my favorite groups on YouTube. Zero Discrimination. Of course, that's our very own Gypsy. And Girls Rock Metal Detecting. So there you have it. Thank you all for tuning in and have a good night.